Well, good morning, friends. Happy Saturday to you. It is good to have you here this morning. Thank you for coming. Yep, thanks for coming this morning. This is day 2 of our biennial, and today we get Bible study time. We do our business meeting. We've got some workshops this morning, so good day to be here. So thank you. Thanks for choosing to be here and representing your churches and ministries. My name is Rob White, and I pastor at First Baptist down in Davenport. Been serving as the president of the region for the last 2 years, and almost done. So I think, yeah. So we'll get to more about leadership in a little bit. But this morning, we're going to have just a prayer, and then Pam Durso, who is the president at Central Seminary, is going to lead us in a Bible study this morning. So we get to dive right into the Word. So let's go ahead and pray. We are grateful, God Almighty, for the beauty of this day, and our hearts and minds and spirits tingle at the expectation of coming to meet with you this morning in word and in fellowship and learning. And so we're excited about what you have in store for us. And we confess that we don't know what that is, but we come with a sense of anticipation and expectation that you will meet us where we are today. We ask that your hand would be upon Pam this morning as she's leading us in study, and a lot of us probably are familiar with many of the passages that we look at, but we pray that we would come into this with new minds, new hearts, new spirits to hear what you're saying to us today, in this time and in this place. And so open us up this morning, God, and bless our time together as we lift up our prayers, our churches, the body of Christ to you, in the precious name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. All right, Pam, thanks so much.
Good morning. Hope you all slept well. Well, for those of you who've been sleeping in a hotel, it's always the first night, right, where you don't sleep. So I slept pretty well, which is good. As our planning committee, talked about Crossroads at the church, we talked about discernment. And so I thought we could spend some time this morning looking at a scripture and having a conversation about discernment and what that looks like. For me, discernment is a collective experience. We, as churches, discern together, we sit together, we pray together, we sit in silence sometimes together, seeking to know what God is calling us to do and to be. But we also discern as individuals. And I have recently discovered this scripture that I've read it many times, but sometimes you discover one, like it hadn't been there before, but it's always been in the Bible. But Philippians 1:9 through 11 is one that has stirred some thoughts in me that I had not had before about discernment, personal discernment, individual discernment, because that's part of the collective too. We all have to discern our part in the collective of the church and where God is leading us as individuals. So I'm going to read this, and I'd like for you to listen for words that capture your imagination, that just leap out to you, and then we'll read it twice through. So pay attention the first time, and then we'll read it again, and it's here on the screen. Philippians 1:9 through 11. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So, I want you to listen to it again, but this time I want you to close your eyes and not read the words on the screen, and just listen for the words that capture your attention. And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. So you can open your eyes. Any words capture your attention? Abound. That's a good word. About. Knowledge. Grace. Excellent. That's more. Always more. That's good. Well, when I read this scripture a couple weeks ago, the word, and it wasn't just a word, it was a combination of words that came for me. Hector's been so good to me today, taking care of me. Thank you, Hector. So it's this combination of words. We're talking about discernment, and discernment is in this scripture. But this verse helped me to see the tie between knowledge, discernment, and love. Our discernment, my discernment, is tied to love. It's connected to love. It's somehow infused with love. So discernment and love now are words that have some kind of connection in my understanding of my own discernment process. And I had never really looked at it that way. So it gave me a fresh idea about what discernment could be for me. So hold on to that idea of discernment and love. And there is another quote I want to share with you that comes from one of my favorite books. It's a book written by Richard Hester and Kelly Walker Jones called Know Your Story and Lead with It. And this is, I'll give you a little context. When Jackie introduced me, I have a PhD in church history. History is one of my passions. And the reason it became a passion is because I love a good story. I'm all about stories. My whole childhood, I was the child saying, read me another story, tell me another story. And that's continued to be part of my life. And so history is just a natural place for me to live because history is stories that come together and help us understand both our past and our present. So this is a quote that speaks really loudly to me. We understand ourselves and our world by means of story. Our personal story or our self-story holds together past, present, and future. Memories come to us in stories. And in the present moment, we extend that story. That unfolding story of the past and present takes us into the future. Memories come to us in stories. So we live with stories in our head from our childhood, from our adult years. We hold our stories. I hold my grandmother's stories in my head as I live my life every day. All those stories of what has happened in my life and to those I love and to the circles of friends and fellow church members that I have, all of those live in my memories. So this morning, I have a story I want to tell you. And I know that telling personal stories for preachers or presidents is always kind of risky because you have to be vulnerable and share your own story. But it also is the risk of perception of self-interest or grandstanding. And those are two risks that this morning I'm going to take because we've known each other now for like 14 hours, so we're friends. So I want to tell you the story of my calling because it has helped me to understand discernment and love and those connections. And I now see that in my own story in a way that I haven't necessarily always. So this is my story of my calling to ministry. So my first calling took place when I was 12 years old. I was the daughter of a Southern Baptist pastor living in Texas. It was the 1970s. So let me say that again. It was 12-year-old me, Southern Baptist preacher's daughter, Texas, 1970s. It was during a revival service. I had this sense that God was drawing me to something, and I had no idea what that could be, because in my experience, I did not know that God could or would call a woman to do anything. And I certainly had no understanding or experience that God could or would call a woman to ministry. I had no imagination for that at all. And so I did what you're supposed to do. I told my Sunday school teacher, and she was stumped. This had never been part of her experience either. And so she said, well, we'll have to talk to the pastor. And that's my dad. So my dad and I sat one evening And I told him what I was experiencing, and he did what a pastor does. He said, okay, let's pray about it. So he prays. But my dad, I had no imagination, and he had no imagination either, because he had never encountered a woman who said that she'd been called to ministry. What I really think is he'd never encountered a woman in Southern Baptist life in Texas in the 1970s, a woman who was brave enough to say, I've been called to ministry. I think he encountered lots of women who had those gifts and that calling. So here we are. My dad has no imagination, and I have no imagination. But he prayed over me. And then we never spoke of that again, ever. In 50 years, we've still never spoken about that night again, because it just seemed like it was too risky. You know, it disturbed everything that we understood about the ways God worked, about how God called, and about our own relationship. And so we just never spoke about it again. We've talked about other things since then, my vocation and my calling and the ways I've served God, but that night has never been a point of discussion for us, which is really fascinating because it's been 50 years, this year, 50 years since we had that conversation, and we haven't talked about it for 50 years. But even though I had no imagination at the age of 12, that sense of calling stayed with me. And I tried to understand it and figure it out. But finally, when I was 18, I went off to Baylor University, Sick'em Bears, what's this in? Oh, well, I'll root for Iowa State. I got nothing. I mean, I am not a Baylor cheerleader. Go Iowa State, yay. But I did go to Baylor twice, so. But I went to Baylor as a freshman. Sitting in a New Testament class, we were required to take 2 religion classes, and New Testament was the one I chose to take first. It was an 8 a.m. Tuesday morning class, and I had Dr. Russell Lester. They called him Lester the Tester, the grade point molester. Because he would give quizzes over the footnotes in these really thick textbooks. But he was a gentle soul, a wonderful man, and he spoke in a monotone voice on Tuesday and Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. And by the middle of the semester, I was hooked. I fell in love with that class. I fell in love with Dr. Lester. I fell in love with studying the New Testament. And somewhere near the end of the semester, I said, okay, this is it. This is what God's been calling me to all along, and I just didn't know. I'm going to be a professor just like Dr. Lester, but not monotone. So I set out on that path. I went and got a Master of Divinity degree. I went back to Baylor and studied for a PhD in church history, and I was set. I now had an imagination of what God could be calling me to do and to be. So I finished my doctoral work in 1992. And if you know anything about Baptist life in the South during that season, it was a conflictual time for Baptists. They were fighting, as we do. But I graduated and I applied to hundreds of places. I sent my resume to Baptist colleges and universities, and there was no room for me there. I sent my resume to Methodist and Presbyterian schools, to public institutions, and all I heard was no. Repeated rejection is a really hard place to live, and I lived with it for several years before I just gave up. And 7 years later, I got a call from a friend who said, there's a new divinity school at Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. Come talk to us about this position. And they hired me. So in 1999, I moved my small family from Oklahoma, where we were living then, to Buies Creek, North Carolina. Anybody heard of Buies Creek? Yeah. Oh, very good, Hector. It's a very small town. They have a one stoplight and a Corvette repair shop and a laundromat. It's grown since I left, but I mean, it was a very small town. but it was a teaching opportunity. So they hired me to teach church history and Baptist history. So I moved, and we moved as a family. And it was a good place. I loved being with students. I loved teaching. I loved talking to students in the hallways and sitting with them and having coffee, hearing their stories, being part of their lives. And it was a very good experience. But I had 2 small children. I was the only woman on faculty at Campbell, so every student who had problems in their lives would come to my office because I was, well, 2 reasons. I had a box of Kleenexes and I had a bowl of chocolate. And so they would come and tell me the hardest stories I'd heard in my life to that point, and I'd hand them the business card of a counselor and say, you know, this is just more than I can help you with. I'm happy to listen, but I cannot help you with this problem. Seminary students come with lots of baggage. That's one thing I learned at Campbell, that a lot of hurt, people who are hurting and have been hurt, often sense a call to ministry, seeking to, you know, move the world in a different way. And after 4 years, I was really tired because I was giving so much to my students, and I felt like I wasn't doing a good job being a mother. And so I stepped away from Campbell in 2003 and away from teaching and took a nonprofit job and did that for about 6 years. It was a low stress, 9 to 5, and then I didn't take any of it home with me. And it was good. So I was just living my life. I was serving at that time on the leadership team of Baptist Women in Ministry, which was a really small nonprofit that resourced women in Baptist life who'd been called to ministry and were serving as chaplains and counselors and pastors and in doing other nonprofit work. So I got some of the joy of serving from being on this leadership team. In 2007, I had another call from God that was even more distinct than the first. I was standing in the back of a very crowded room filled with women ministers. And I was standing next to a friend, and we were lamenting the fact that women had so few opportunities in our Baptist world to serve in churches, to serve in leadership, to serve as chaplains and counselors. And so as I lamented that, I just suddenly, without thinking, blurted out, well, I may never be a pastor, but I'm going to give my life so that women who sense a call to ministry will have opportunities. I don't know where it came from, but that was just, God moved me to say that out loud, and it became the theme of my life. It has still been the theme of my life since 2007. And I decided that I would use the influence I had and the influence that I could build to help women hear a yes. Not just a yes from me, but a yes from institutions and denominations and from churches. And so I took that role as a leadership team member very seriously and got busy. And in 2009, I was elected to be the executive director of Baptist Women in Ministry and took that role as my life's work. And I tell people that I had the very best job. I mean, I got to go to coffee with these amazing women and mentor them and coach them and help introduce them to churches and to denominations, helping them fulfill their call, use all of their gifts. And so it was a beautiful job, and I decided this is it. This is it for me. I got to teach on the side at McAfee School of Theology, so I got to be a professor, you know, a couple days a week. But my job was just all-consuming because I loved it so much. And I was going to do it until I retired. But then, in the summer of 2019, I got this call from a consultant working with Central Seminary who said that someone had given him my name as, you know, an interested party, and that I might be a candidate to be president of this school. And he told me this, and I laughed. And I hung up. Not on him, like I did say goodbye. But then he called back, and he called back again. All along the way, I've been coaching and mentoring women and men and saying, when the Spirit stirs, when God moves, when there is something out there in your universe that's disruptive, you need to pay attention. And all of a sudden, I had to pay attention, And I didn't know exactly what to do with that, but I began paying attention. So the next time he called, I started asking questions and giving more attention to this idea. And I gathered a group of people around me to help me think about, do I even have gifts to be a president of a seminary? I mean, I've done small nonprofit work. Yes, I have a PhD, but is this something that I could do? And in October 2019, I think it was like the next to the last day before applications were due. I waited till the last minute, and I'm not a last minute person, and I hit send on my application email to send a notice that I was interested, and all my paperwork went. And Tom Wiles was on that committee. So during that process of interview, I began to see a possibility. I began to have imagination of what this could look like. And when I came for the campus interview in January of 2020, I realized that God was indeed calling me to something new. And in February of 2020, I was offered this position, and I said yes. My life has been a series of callings, not a one-time calling, but a series of callings. And paying attention has been something that I've had to do all along, not just one time, but many times. And now when I look back at those callings, knowledge and discernment and love come together for me. The love part's easy, because I've always had a love for serving. I love working with students and pastors. I love teaching. Love was easy. It was the imagination part that was always hard for me. So I have sought to develop more skills around being more imaginative for myself, but also helping other people imagine what God is calling them to. So this morning, I'd like for us to go back to this scripture and read it one more time. And then I want to involve you in a little activity. It's time for you to do some work. So the scripture. It is my prayer that your love may abound more and more, with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So, it is your turn. One of the things that I believe that sometimes we as churches have not done well is to share our stories. This used to be testimonies. You remember testimonies in church growing up? In my southern churches, there was always testimony time. But we don't always do that as much in my church now. And for me, testimony really is story. And it's hard for us to find time to sit and reflect even on our own stories. So we're going to have a storytelling time, and I have a plan, but I want to tell you two things. Do not fear. I will not put you on the spot, ever. And second of all, as we think about stories, think beyond just the grand narrative. Sometimes we think that has to be a spectacular story to be told. But the reality is God works every day in the small for us. And sometimes it's the small stories that are the most impactful. So here is my challenge to you. I want you to start by just sitting quietly where you are and think back. Think back to your early days of faith. And for some of you, your early days of faith are childhood memories. And some of you, you might have been a teenager when you came to faith. Some of you might have been adults or older adults when you came to faith. But just think about the earliest days of faith for you. Where did you live at that time? Who was important in your life? Who taught you the stories of faith? Who shaped your faith? What do you remember about those early days of faith? So I'd like for you to sit and think about that just for 3 or 4 minutes. So one of the things you'll learn about me is I'm very tactile. I learn by using my hands, and I pay attention by touching. So I'm sharing that gift with you, whether you want to have that gift or not this morning. So, but one of the things I have found is if I can create something with my hands, it embeds it into my heart. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. With the things that you have thought about your early faith, form one of the pipe cleaners into something that makes you think about your early faith. You don't have to have any artistic skill. This doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be something that anyone except you understands what it is. But just create something that would help you think about those early days of faith for you. I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes. Does anybody need some more time, or you? Okay. So then, with your second pipe cleaner, I want you to take that one and use it to create an image for you that speaks to a time in your life that was kind of a turning point in your faith. A time when you sensed God's presence, where you had clarity about God, where God was leading you, maybe something new God was calling you to do. So a time when you knew that God said to you, stand, look, walk, ask, or find. So your second pipe cleaner, create something, doesn't have to be beautiful or artistic, just has to speak to you. time. Well, now you know what I'm going to ask you to do, right? So if you could find someone and pair up, preferably someone you're not married to or closest relationship with, as you feel comfortable, share what your pipe cleaners say to you. And if this is something that makes you uncomfortable, find a place in the sanctuary that you can sit and pray over your pipe cleaners. But it's time to share your stories, using these pipe cleaners as ways to prompt you, to explain them to another person. So we'll take about, I'd say about 6 minutes, so everybody needs to take about 3 minutes. It can't be your entire life story, just the pipe cleaners. So, go. Well, friends, I'd like to call you back. I know there are more stories to tell. I appreciate your taking part, and I heard all the buzz in the room, so there was lots of good laughter and sharing. But I'm wondering, what did you hear? Not the specific stories, but what did you hear? What did you sense in sharing stories with either people you know or people you don't know? Love. God was involved all the way. Coming together. Yeah. Anything else?
The way God uses impressions in our life, maybe through a dream or just an impression that he leaves on you, and that comes back to you later. And you realize he's been working through it.
All the time. God's been working all the time. Well, I hope that this will encourage you to share your stories. I think sometimes we think our stories aren't important, and sometimes we don't take time to pull together our stories in ways that we can share with other people that will bring meaning. And, you know, the old, kind of old-timey churches I came from, testifying, this is what you're doing with each other, is testifying to your faith. And it's a very powerful way to share your life with others, those who don't have a church experience, those who might need a place to express their faith. I think storytelling for me becomes a way that makes our deep faith shareable with those that we encounter. So I do a lot of storytelling practices, and I've worked on my story because I want to be able to share it with others. So I'd encourage you to think about your stories. And your memories come in stories of your faith. Be able to craft those. So I hope you'll take your pipe cleaners home and put them out somewhere you can remember this. And then you can share your story with someone this week. And I will turn it over to Rob.
Thank you so much, Pam. We appreciate having you here, and there'll be an opportunity to hear from Pam again in one of the workshop opportunities, so we'll talk about that in just a little bit. One of the things that we do here at the Biennial is handle the business of the region, and so it's part of our agenda. And so I've never been someone who loved Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know if we need to follow that here, but I officially call this meeting to order. Do you have to do that? I don't know. You have to hit something? Yeah. Okay. So it's official now. One of the things that, some of you just don't know my sense of humor at all, do you? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. One of the things that we have to do is do like a roll call, like find out who we've got here. And I've got a list, but we want to make sure that we've got the churches represented and that we don't miss anyone. And so I'm just going to do a real quick roll call, and just give me a shout out if you're representing your church here today, okay? We're starting off with First Baptist Church of Ames, Iowa. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Now your goal is to outdo that. All right. Who do we have here from Boone? All right, Boone, Iowa. Very good. Do we have First Baptist Church of Cherokee? All right, way to go, Jeff. How about the church on Northland? Patrick, come on. Nobody can hear you waving your thing. First Baptist Church of Northland. Church of the, okay, there we go. Thank you for the correction, Patrick. How about First Baptist Church of Dubuque? Very good. Let's just take a real quick moment also to acknowledge the hospitality that First Baptist Church of Dubuque is offering us. You know, one of the things that's really stood out to us is that this church is in the pastoral search right now. And so when we began the process of looking for a place to host our biennial, we thought, we'll ask, but they'll say no. You know, because we don't have a pastor to lead it. And my goodness, I mean, this church has not only been willing to do this, but has been eager to do this, excited to do this. And so, you know, from the hospitality we received last night to this morning and setting up our lunch today and just being so accommodating. So, again, thank you guys. What a blessing it is for us to be able to share your space with you. So we appreciate that. First Baptist Church of Davenport. Woo! I thought you guys were going to do like a wave or something, but you guys are all in one row. How about First Baptist of Greater Des Moines? All right, good. How about First Baptist Church of Fairfield? Wow, all right, John. How about Fort Dodge? Yeah, all right, good. How about Jefferson? Yeah, all right, that counts. How about Iowa Falls? Yeah, there we go. That's some enthusiasm. How about Pella? Yay! All right, all right. How about St. Paul? All right, yep, good, good. How about Waterloo? All right. How about, what do we got? Hillsboro and Harrisburg. All right, yep. Pickwick Community. Good enough, Tim, good enough. Renwick. All right, very good, excellent. How about Westover? Yep, yo. How about Mount Olive? Anybody from? All right, hey, Jeff's got double duty here. How about Pilgrim? Yay! All right, Charles. All right. How about Downey? There. All right, very good. And I know that we've got some that are also with us online today, or I think are checking with us online. Hector, do we have anybody that's checking in?
There's been no churches share online yet. Donna is checking and
Okay.
communicating with them, and she'll let them know as soon as they respond.
Very good. Okay. So hopefully we'll be getting some that are tuning in, following the link. Is there anybody in here that I did not call this morning that is representing a church that I didn't mention? Very good. Well, we're excited that you're here representing the churches in your region and grateful that you are. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate our shared ministry as a region. So thank you so much for choosing to be here. So one of the things that we do is we talk about leadership within the region, those that have been serving in leadership positions and those that are going to be. And so our president-elect, Lori Whitaker, is the head of the nominating team and is going to talk to us for a little bit about those that are going to be coming into leadership. So, Lori, I'll invite you up.
So when I was asked to be in this position, someone forgot to tell me that if you're president-elect, you're also chair of the nominating committee. And I think they know why, because that would be the last committee I'd want to be on. But I found that out, and so I have done my duty. Before we go through the list, I want to first thank all of those who have served the last 2 years on different teams and in different offices. And then I would also like to thank all of those who are willing to do a second term. There weren't there weren't as many as I'd hoped, let's put it that way. But we did have several who were going off. They've served 2 terms, and that's the most you can serve in one position. So a few of those were willing to take a different position. But as you can see, we have a new slate of officers, and I am very happy, very glad it's done, for the most part, but not completely, because as you can see, we have a few vacancies. So I want to thank all of you who said yes, It may have taken you a little time, but that's okay. You did say yes. And I also want to tell you that last night when I was serving communion, it was a very unique experience and special experience for me, because as each of you would come to the front, I would look at your name tag and I'd think, oh, I emailed that person or I called that person. I know that person. You know, I hadn't met you personally yet, but and some of you I'd Zoomed with, but still seeing you in person was so special. So, yes, as I said, we still have some vacancies, and our new terms for those of you who are going to be in leadership, the new terms don't begin until January, so we do have time to fill those last 4 spots. So if any of you are here and you haven't said yes yet, I'm asking you now to be willing to serve in the leadership of our region. And if you feel like you have too many other commitments at this time, but know someone else who might be willing or be good at that position, then please contact me or Jackie in the region office. So, do I need to make a motion? Okay, as chair of the nominating committee, I move that we elect all those who are listed here on the yellow sheet you were given for the term of 2025 through 2026.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of accepting this slate of officers, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay? Okay, motion carries.
I also want to thank my committee, because we had several Zooms, especially in the last few weeks, like 1 a week. And that would be Jan Grogan, Charles, and please raise your hand, Charles Gill, Robert White, and Jackie Saxon. So they were great. Let's thank them. I know that they did just as much work as I did. So, and that's what you have to have, is a good committee to go with you, to help you. So, should we introduce, like, the new president-elect? Okay. We, as the committee, were just thrilled to get a yes from Ernest Jackson. And probably all of you met him already, because he's the moderator of this church. And I'm just thrilled that I'm going to get to work with him for the next 2 years. So, thank him. So, I'd also like, if your name is on this sheet, I'd like for you to stand right now. I know we have a few who aren't here, and they had good reasons, but I'd like for you to stand. And because we do appreciate what you're going to do for the region in the next couple of years, just as we appreciate those who have done what they did the last couple of years. So, thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much. Really appreciate that, Lori. We did get word that we do have one church that is participating online today, Reverend Jack Admission from First Baptist of Danville. is representing his church online, so we appreciate that very much. Also a shout out to Christine Quintana, who is monitoring our online presence, and so really appreciate that as well. It's a privilege to serve in leadership in the region. It is, because I think a lot of us know it's a challenge just to serve in leadership in our local congregations. I mean, there's a lot that is pulling on us, and a lot of responsibility, and it weighs on us just to try to manage those responsibilities, and then to represent the region on top of that can be very challenging. But how cool is it that we're serving the larger church this way, that we're serving just outside, not just our own local community, but the wider body of Christ, and so it's really a privilege, and so thank you for serving alongside of us in that role. We really appreciate that. One of the joys for me over the last 2 years as president and the previous 2 years as president-elect has been to work directly alongside of Jackie Saxon, who is our executive minister and has been for almost exactly 6 years. And so Jackie's going to come up and give us her report, and we not ready for that? No, Oh, okay. Jackie Saxon, everybody.
What we have left before we go into workshops, but I'll be super brief. But it is a privilege. It's a privilege. It really is to be your executive minister for. On October 1st, 2018, I began as that. So it's pretty wild to think it's been has it been 6 years, or I'm going into my 6th year? I never could figure that out. I'm going into my 7th year? Oh, okay, I'm going into my 7th. Wow. Okay, there we go. Thank you. I just really want to highlight right now what I like to call the power and the blessing of the laity. Many in this room have or are currently in a search process. And not everybody, but a lot, and since I've been here. And it's been the laity that have kept churches going. And so I just really appreciate your steadfastness. It's hard sometimes, and I know it's tiresome, and you're wondering, how long, oh Lord, how long? We got to hang in there. Okay, we do have churches that are still searching, this one in particular, but several others. I thank Walt Clausen and his wife for being steadfast at Westover. It's been, 4 years that you've been the interim there? Thank you for your commitment to them. There are folks out there, God is preparing their hearts. It's just not time yet, I guess. So I just wanted to thank you and encourage you because it's the laity that make this job and this place work. I thank the pastors, don't get me wrong, but I really do appreciate the laity. According to Valley Forge, we're 115 churches between Iowa and Minnesota. And I think that numbers probably needs to come a little south, but according to Valley Forge, we're at 115 between the two states. What's been going on in the region, a lot of that you see on the bodybuilder. How many of you are getting the bodybuilder? Okay, if you're not getting the bodybuilder, let me know, because that's kind of how that's my alarm. That's how I try to keep up with what's happening in your churches, because you are what's happening in the region. We've had a couple of anniversaries recently in the bodybuilder, and the things that you all are doing are so great, because then I can send those and share those with everybody else, and maybe somebody in the region will say, we could do that. We might do it a little differently, but that's a great idea. And that's my hope, is that we will have that kind of an exchange. I spent a lot of time with search committees. Spent a lot of time trying to figure out how we make that work. Beth McCaw, good friend, but good Presbyterian. We serve together. Stand up, Beth. I know you're getting ready to do a workshop for you. But she's from Dubuque Seminary here in town. And she and I met when I was at Austin Seminary doing student affairs. And so she was doing student affairs as well, and we would meet together along with the other Presbyterian Seminary student affairs folks. But she's got a great workshop coming up, and we were talking today about just this sense of scarcity and trying to reframe the fact that there is abundance. There is so much abundance out there. God is doing great things in your churches, and I love it when I get to showcase those and that we get to talk about those. I have to tell you, I'm on a high because we had a really great ministers' conference just a couple days ago. here in town. And we had 23 folks that were together, and we were led by Wallace Smith and Andrea Roth. They are a couple in Kansas City. Wallace is a very good friend of mine. And we had a great time talking about the story of Elijah and just all that went into that. And I want to thank the planning team for that, because it was a fun time to plan. I mean, you know, you're doing all this stuff on Zoom these days, and Zoom can be consuming. But it was fun to get together with the planning team and talk and laugh, and it was fun to be in person once we got there together. So on a high from that, on a high from this biennial. I must say, this man has kept me on track. I appreciate Rob so many ways. He's always the one coming up with, hey, let's talk about this, and hey, let's talk. We get together as an executive team every month. So they're my tether to what's happening, and they're, you know, the ones that, you know, because it can be kind of lonely in this job, and it's always nice that every month we get together on Zoom, and he always has a question for the team to answer among ourselves, and so we've gotten to know each other in a very special way that way, and I really appreciate your leadership. So yeah, give it up for Rob. Our region steward, John Moore, wrote an article that appeared both in the Bodybuilder for several editions, and then you got it in the mail as part of the snail mail package with information about the biennial and everything. But I just wanted to read the kind of conclusion that he shared. And it says, the region has strong financial reserves, but we seek to maintain a balanced budget to ensure solid financial footing for a sustainable future. This is where we need continued and expanded support from our congregations if we are to maintain a balanced budget going forward. This is where you can help. If your congregation is actively participating and giving to the United Mission Program, great. Consider your potential to increase your contribution. If your congregation is not currently actively participating, prayerfully consider participating. Just as your congregation depends on tithes and offerings for your members to survive, the region depends on United Mission giving from our congregations to survive. Start small and grow your giving as you are able in the future. So that's the stewardship pitch that, you know, every executive minister has to give. Yes, I want to thank you all for your United Mission contributions. We're 115 churches, and I would love to be able to say that all 115 are contributing, but that is not the case. And so we really need to get the rest of them kind of on board, but I'm very happy for you all. And really, I'm very happy just being here with you. Thank you for coming. You know, you plan something, and you think, God, are they really going to come? And you came. You know, I might need to have a little more confidence in God. I'm just saying. But those are just some brief remarks from me, Rob. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, because I know we've got other things that need to happen.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jackie. We have just a couple quick reports from some of our auxiliary organizations, and any comments that teams want to make as well. We have two amazing camps in our area, and I know that Matt is here from Dayton Oaks, and to give, I'm sorry, and Danny, yeah, from Dayton Oaks, in order to give an update. So, do you guys want to come up and kind of share with us a little bit?
God is good. And all the time? Now, if we were at camp, you would all be in trouble. That was very lackluster. We got to bring some energy into things, which I have plenty of most of the time. It's good to be here. It's always good to see people that I haven't seen in a while. But camp this year was, for us, we had a little bit of growth. We had 114 campers this summer. We're still slowly fighting back from the COVID year of no camp, trying to get to that number. That seems to be the consensus when you talk to other camps, that everybody's kind of battling back. And with the current state of the price of everything, it's, there's only so much money in your pocketbook, right? So parents have to make decisions. So just to kind of go through, I compiled some numbers, just kind of help everybody out. So of the kids that we had come to camp, 1/4 of all those kids were scholarshiped by us directly. This does not include all the churches that already scholarship kids that they send to camp. So when you break down both those numbers, it's like 92% of all kids that come to camp are scholarshiped one way or another. Now, that's good, but it's also scary, because what it means is we have very few parents footing the bill for their kids to come to camp. And so as those are challenges, but they're challenges that we got to think through. And we got to think about that, because as the price of things increases, it's very hard to keep the camp price not increasing to offset those costs. And look, if I get through summer camp and just in the summer camp piece we break even, like, I'm excited, okay? Because it's a ministry. But you also have to be responsible with what you're doing. And so those are some challenges that we're working through and going through. What's very interesting is that almost 60% of the kids that came to Dayton Oaks this year have zero, zilch, nothing to do with the Mid-American Baptist churches. So from the time that I've been there, which has been a long time, it started out at about 85% of the kids were from Mid-American Baptist churches. Now we're down to about 40%. In another 10 years, you'll be zero, unless something changes. Well, correct. So, there's always room for growth and improvement, but the bottom line is, I don't care where the kids come from. I just want them to see Jesus. So that's what camping is for. But I like to, at a meeting like this, I like to put this in everybody's head so they understand that the majority of the kids, and I cannot speak for Forest Lake, I don't look at their numbers, the majority of the kids that are coming to our Mid-American Baptist camp, Dayton Oaks, aren't Baptist. Most of them aren't anything, to be honest with you. They have no church affiliation at all. Now what we try to do is we try to funnel them somewhere. I always say this word wrong, especially, my wife hates that. Especially if they make a commitment for Christ at camp, I try to hook them up with someone locally. And that is a big piece of it. But those are kind of some of the things that the number piece of it that's went through. But as far as what we're doing at Dayton Oaks, if you haven't been there, or if you haven't been there in a while, you should come. We have spent a lot of money on working on buildings. We're continuing to work on buildings. We are now, there were 6 original cabins, and then we built another cabin back in 2013. Of the 6 original cabins that were built in the 1960s, we have completely remodeled 3 of those, and we're going to start the 4th one this year. So that will leave 2 left for the next. My goal is to try to get 1 done before spring in 2025, and then maybe 1 in the fall of 2025. But we got given a special gift just for the cabins. So the cabins literally are like brand new when you walk inside them. We left the structure, that's it. It's all new on the inside, it's all new on the outside. So those things and working with other parts of the main building, we've really put a lot of time and energy and finances into that. So if you haven't been there in a while, I offer you, stop by, come down. If you're, not that you don't have enough on your plate as clergy, but I will just add one other thing. If you're looking for something to do over the summer and you want to come and be a pastor at camp, get a hold of me. We'll talk. We'll work it out. It is easier than dealing with your church for a week, I'll just tell you, because I take a lot of that stuff off your plate. But we're always looking for people to be involved in the ministry. If you're not in the pastorate, if you think of people in your church that would love to go and help with camp, have them get a hold of the camp. Either one of us. I guarantee you that we're always looking for people to help and volunteer. And we have some awesome ones, but we're always looking for more. And so if you're interested in doing that, it will be I guarantee you it will be a faith experience that will be great for you. And so I thank you for this time. If you have any questions, always feel free to call or email the camp. I'll get back to you. And we're just, Danny, you're correct. So he had to say something, so now I'll just point it out. So if you haven't met Walt and Lori Clausen, they were my youth pastors when I was in high school. So just to put that in perspective, he's serving at Westover right now. But that is literally my youth pastors growing up, so it's been exciting to see them be in the region. But I thank you, and like I said, seriously, if you feel God calling you, since we just learned about all that, if you feel God calling you to get involved in summer camp ministry, get a hold of one of the camps. I guarantee you we can find a place for you to plug in. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate that. I don't think there's anybody here representing Forest Lake, is there? We do have a report from Forest Lake, and this is what was sent in to us by Sean and Teresa Ott, the Forest Lake camp managers. While we would have loved to have seen more kids at camp this year, we were extremely blessed by the ones that were there. We saw amazing spiritual growth in our campers. We were so happy to welcome several new kids into the Forest Lake camp family and to see other kids returning for another summer. Some news for 2025 we would like to share is our annual ladies retreat will be in late summer or early fall. We decided it was time for a change, and we will let you know when we decide on a date. We will be having a Kids Day on April 26th with Cambria Baptist Church putting on a skit. We would like to have a carnival theme this year. We are looking for volunteers to plan and work at a game or activity. If you or your church would like to get involved, let us know. It would be a fun way for kids to be introduced to camp. Most importantly, we want to extend a huge thank you for all of your support in so many ways. God's blessings always. Sean and Teresa Ott, Forest Lake camp managers. I sent out notes to our ministry teams and let them know that they did not have to have a report prepared for this time together, but if they wanted to say anything, there would be an opportunity to do that. And so are any of our ministry teams wanting to say anything about what has happened or what is happening, what is coming up? Yeah, Sheila. Yeah, it was a wonderful retreat. Thank you, Sheila. Any other teams that would like to say anything about what has happened or is going to be coming up? The executive team, one of the things that Jackie didn't mention is our executive team made up of our executive minister, the president-elect, our secretary, and our treasurer. There's 5 of us. This year, we started each taking a liaison role on one of the teams so that it adds one more voice to the creative process, and it also helps us when we get together monthly for executive meetings, we can update each other on what's been going on with the teams. So my team is the youth team that I have been relating to. And I want to give a thanks to Dina Brake, who is also on that youth team and providing exceptional leadership. So I want to give you a quick heads up on a couple things that are going on. Has anybody here have involvement with YLC, Youth Leader Corps? Has anybody been through that program, YLC? It's been a long-running program, yeah. A number of years ago here, it was going on and it kind of died out, and they tried to revive it under a different name. Well, that's one of the points of focus for the youth team this year has been to revive that and try to rebrand it. And so they're calling that program L640, and that stands for Luke 6, chapter 6, verse 40, L640. And Luke 6:40, I'm sure you all have this memorized, but the student, this is Jesus speaking, the student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like the teacher. And so the purpose of the L640 program is to take high school students and develop leadership and discipleship skills in them to help them become instrumental leaders within their congregation, their school, and beyond. Several people that I have talked to who went through YLC have indicated that that was an instrumental time for them in their call even into ministry. And so we want to put out an appeal to you as church representatives to identify high school students, particularly sophomores, juniors, seniors, that you think that you see leadership skills in or potential leadership in, especially spiritual leadership, and let us know who they are so that we can connect with them and get them involved in this program. The program would run really the kind of the length of the school year. Right now, we're doing kind of an experimental version of it using some hybrid of online and in-person events. And so if you've got someone, gosh, let us know so that we can connect with them, okay? The other big event that the youth team plans is the Region Youth Event, which happens at the end of October, the last weekend in October each year. That takes place at the church in Northland in Cedar Rapids. It's a wonderful event. Usually there's 100 to 125 kids and adult leaders that come, and we have a speaker, and we have music and workshops, and it's just an incredible time of fellowship. This is open for all junior high and high school students. And so if you would like information on that, Dina has got some pamphlets and some information. Do you have it on both those programs, Dina? Or just RIE? Just RIE, okay. So if you want some information on RIE, please let her know, because it really is a fantastic event. And it's coming up quickly, end of this month, October 25, 26, 27. So please let her know, and we'll get information to you. Is there anything else that we've got before we move into some workshop time? Well, we're going to, we do that now. We've got a little bit of flexibility. I know we're moving into workshops at 10:15, but before we do the photo, I want to ask real quick. We have 4 workshops that are going to be offered because we want there to be some practical ministry takeaways. You know, things that you can take back with you to your contexts. And so we really brainstormed hard, like what would be helpful for people to take back with them to their churches. And so we came up with 4 different workshops and 4 workshop leaders, which are going to be offered back to back, the same workshops back to back. And so I want to ask real quick if our workshop leaders would just real quick, one at a time, stand up and say, this is what my workshop is going to be about, okay? And so on the back of your program today, we've got them listed, but Pam Durso is going to be leading one of those. So Pam, just give a shout. What is your workshop about? Okay. The nuts and bolts of discernment. And Pam's workshop is going to be right out in the gathering area, and it'll be starting in just a little bit, and then it will run again. So if you do go to one of the workshops and it's full, find a different one, go back to that one for the next one, okay? Beth McCaw is going to be leading a workshop. And Beth, what is your workshop about? And so in your program, it's listed as, or in one of the handouts, it was listed as identifying, equipping, enabling, empowering leaders. And that's kind of, I think Beth's going to be giving a take on that as well. How do we find leaders within our churches without just recycling through and burning out other ones? Rodney Ragwan is going to be leading a workshop. Where did Rodney go? And Rodney, what's yours about? Okay, yeah, ministry to and with aging congregations. I know not many of us can relate to what that's like, but yeah, so I forgot to mention Beth's workshop is going to be right here in the sanctuary, and Rodney's is going to be right next door in the parsonage, so it's right across the walkway, and it'll be downstairs, and there's an upstairs and a downstairs, so Rodney's will be downstairs. And Dave Russell, where did Dave go? Oh yeah, Dave, what is your workshop about? Sure, and that's a reality for so many of our churches now. We have people watching online. How do we engage them? You know, so wonderful. So you'll be able to go to 2 of those. You pick the 2 that, oh yeah, and Dave's is across in the upstairs, in the parsonage upstairs. And so the upper room, okay, I like that, Dave. One of the things that we want to do is memorialize our time together in picture form. And so Jackie would like for us to gather up here in the front to take a picture. And then we'll dismiss to our workshops. Take 45 minutes for the workshops, and then there's some moving time. Yeah.
Right, I just wanted to, because we're off the schedule, so you gotta help me.
Yeah, it's okay. All right, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. These people are flexible. As long as we get home in time for the Hawkeye game at 2:30. Or Iowa State. I don't know when they play, but yeah. 6:30. Okay, there'll be plenty of time. Okay. All right. Well, let's gather up in the front here, and we'll see if we can get a picture.
Great.
All right, everybody, go ahead and head to your workshops. It's 10:30 now, so those will go until 11:15. And then, you know, when we gather up, our lunch is at 12:30. Lunch is at 12:30. So we've got a little bit of flexibility. So go to workshops. We'll start those real shortly. Go 45 minutes, and then go to your second set. Okay, good? All right, let's have a good time. I can give you a clicker. Whatever you prefer.
That's fine. I was trying to get this. Do you want to talk with the mic? You're probably right there, I'm going to guess. And then the other thing I would ask is, well, I got to type. You could keep the mic right there, because if you start doing this, and if you can hear yourself, that's pretty good. Yeah. But that's about right.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll tip it as we need. Okay. And then whenever I have slides, I'll go off of that. Good morning, friends. What a joy to be with you. I was so appreciative of your executive minister, Reverend Jackie Saxon, with a little shout out. In another lifetime, it was a joy for us to be able to minister together. And then it's a joy to be in this particular congregation because I live in Dubuque. I'm the dean. I teach at the Presbyterian Seminary in town. But every once in a while, every few months, I circle around. I'm able to worship with the saints here, and every so often be part of the pulpit supply, and always feel a great hospitable welcome here. This is a wonderful family, and I'm gathering what I find here runs in the family from what I've seen here today. I'm joining you wearing a couple of different hats. One of them is, after the time that Jackie and I were ministering together, I was working with small congregations in western Montana, and that was through COVID, when I was also on many, many Zooms with churches all across the country as we were brainstorming and comparing notes. And I feel like I've been able to have this season of the 30,000-foot view on what's happening across the country in churches right now, and in the landscape. So I'm bringing some of that perspective to you. And then also, I've worked at the seminary wearing different hats for 20 years, and have seen dramatic shifts on who's showing up for training and where they're going and where they're ending up. And my goal for our time together is that you get to glimpse some of the landscape, so that you know it's not just you, and it's not even about you if you're sensing these shifts and changes in the church, that you'll know this is part of a sea change right now. We're all navigating together. And then I also want to describe some of the work that I've been doing with churches out there and with the seminary, especially in helping small churches find new forms of being church and carrying out ministry that are not the model we saw 20 years ago, but hold a lot of promise for what is coming up tomorrow, the metaphorical tomorrow, the years ahead. And then also give you some literal snapshots of churches I've worked with that are trying some new things and seeing what life they might hold. So I hope there might be different points that you take away. One is knowing you're not alone and being more aware of what's happening demographically, or maybe coming away with some ideas for refreshing things in your neighborhood. Some of this data you might know, but I've crunched it all together for us this morning just to have that view out of the plain window here. This is very small for you. Don't worry about reading it. Mostly this is there to keep me on track, and I can supply the slides afterward if you don't want to have to worry about capturing any numbers or things like that. So no notes need to be taken. I took the notes, and you don't have to be able to read them because I'll speak to what we're seeing, and it will keep me on track. So we're done in our 40 minutes or so. So just a little bit of historical perspective. The last remnant of the baby boomer generation is wrapping up in our pews. Big growth in the church after World War II. Part of that was the Holy Spirit at work, and part of it also was part of the culture, right? We had this muscle memory. This is what people do on Sunday mornings. They get up, they dress up, they take the kids, and they go to church. It was a way of life in the United States in those days. And so that really robustly supported high church attendance and high membership in those days. The culture was working in our favor, so to speak. But things have shifted now. It is a really different world from then. It's a different world from 10 years ago even. And we're finding that denominational loyalty has really diminished. And my kids are in this. I have actually they're all in their 20s now. I have 3 kids in their 20s. And I'm really thankful that they found places to grow spiritually or to worship, but they don't care about finding a Presbyterian church. They're happy to find a place where they sense the love of God and the family of God. And so we used to have a model where we assumed that our kids would take our places in the pews and our grandkids would then follow. It doesn't work that way anymore. It was interesting to hear about the camp reports. This is happening at other camps too. And it's sad news, and it's also good news that we're having other kids show up. They aren't the kids we expected. We thought it was going to be our kids, but it's other kids showing up in our pews or our camps. So one of the prompts this morning when we think about imagination is, who are we expecting? Who are we looking for? And maybe we broaden that category of who we're looking for. If you're in a smaller church, many of our small churches are smaller these days. 2000, that was not that long ago in my life, at least, doesn't seem that long ago. The median attendance or membership for smaller churches these were smaller churches in those days, 137 members. And then 2020, and it's smaller now, post-pandemic, it had dropped to 65, 137 to 65 for average size. And that's not to give us despair, it's to give us context. Churches are smaller, and I'm going to argue, we'll conclude, I think there's some real advantages to small churches in our world today. For in the middle of an epidemic of isolation and loneliness, not everybody's looking to get lost in a crowd. Another demographic truth that we're really running up against is there's been a whole wave of traditional clergy retiring in the past 10 years. This is the downside of this bubble, right? When we have a great growth and people training as pastors, well, at some point that wave then retires. I was serving 20 smaller churches in western Montana during the pandemic, and we had a number of retirements. That sort of became a natural off-ramp for some folks who said, okay, I think I've had my season now, and it's going to be a new landscape for new people, but we're missing those who have retired. Here's a really interesting statistic from my Presbyterian world. Our Board of Pensions, which insures a lot of our clergy, did a study, 2023, just last year, and of 150 member churches or less, that's the vast majority of our churches, only 30% have installed pastors. This means 70% of the great majority of Presbyterian Church USA congregations in the U.S. do not have an installed pastor, and the majority of those will not have a full-time clergy installed pastor in the foreseeable future. There are some, but this is where we get to exploring new models of leadership. That's one very specific model of leadership, and sometimes we forget that's only one very specific model of leadership for how churches carry on. And then, as I sit in the seminary, we have students, but they are thinking outside the box. And so some of them are going into bivocational ministry, really interesting trend I've seen with people who are part-time librarians and part-time ministers, lay pastors in congregations, folks who are also going into social work. And so it's not like the old days when 40 moving vans pulled up after seminary graduation and traditional people drove off to places far away to do the traditional church in the traditional way. So they're out there, but they're doing some really different things. So sometimes this is characterized as the decline of the church. I don't like that word. Jesus is still risen. The church is still alive and well in the world and flourishing in different ways in different places all over the globe. But we're seeing a shift in what the church looks like, and we need to not get overly anxious about that. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
So we are experiencing a change in privilege.
Yes, we got quite used to just having the luxury of carrying on as we were. And yes, we are seeing a lot of growth in the southern and eastern hemispheres of the world and in immigrant communities. Yes, it is sometimes really good to remember that the church is alive and well in the world, even though there's great shifts in whatever particular congregation we find ourselves. So take heart. So I don't like the word decline. I'd rather use the word shift right now. It's a sea change, and so it's disorienting. It makes us have motion sickness. But it's not that the church is dying. Again, Christ is risen. The church is very busy, and God is very busy. And in the middle of all of that, we're seeing new forms of church and leadership emerge for congregations that lean into that change. I really appreciated with our devotions this morning the role of imagination being lifted up, right? Like back in that day, 1970s in Texas, could anybody even imagine a little girl growing up to be a pastor? No, there was not imagination for that. So we just said a prayer, and God took it from there. Thank you, God. But imagination is really important for us. And our imaginations are still very much engaged with remembering and with nostalgia on what church used to look like. But the truth is, things have changed demographically, and then COVID just put the accelerator on with the changes. And some of our churches right now are distressed, still waiting for people to come back and be in the pews at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. And we're feeling discouraged that they're not. But it's not just the church. You know, the debate's going on right now. Are people going to go back to offices 5 days a week ever again? Or is it going to be hybrid work arrangements from here on out? Will people go back to theaters and fill them up the way that they used to? It's not just the church. Our whole society is having a sea change in how we gather, how we stay connected with one another. And it's disorienting because we don't know exactly how it's going to land. But it's not just the church. We're in the middle of something very big right now. Another change is the rise of the nuns. Are some of you familiar with this? So I'm not talking about the habits. I'm talking about the NONES, people who, when they get hospitalized and on the intake, they're saying, is there a religious tradition you claim? If we have a chaplain in the house, and they say none, because they don't claim a particular affiliation. 1985, 7% of people in the U.S. said no. In 2020, 30%, I'd say it's about a third now, will say, no, I don't really have a faith affiliation. Yeah, it is. Even it's gone up. 48% is what I'm hearing here. So we're in a different landscape. Remember I said that muscle memory and habit post-World War II? That's not the landscape we're in anymore, that folks say this is what we do. But that does not mean people out there aren't spiritual, or they're not curious, or they don't have big existential questions, or they're not lonely, or they're not afraid. They're spiritual people filling our world right now, whether or not they're affiliated. And I actually was thrilled to hear that half or more of the folks showing up at camp were new. What a phenomenal opportunity to say to those children of God, have you heard clearly about the love of God who will always be there for you? How wonderful is that? What a great ministry that is. Another change in our world is because people are less affiliated, they don't really know, like, what does a church do? What kind of strange club is that? Like, I go by on Sunday morning and there's those big heavy wooden doors and they're doing some things behind those doors, and some kind of religious rituals, or even what pastors do, right? I go to the grocery store, I'm sitting on a train, people say, what do you do? And sometimes I say, I'm a pastor, and they're less clear. Like, what do you do all week? Like, I know you've got to talk for 15 minutes on a Sunday. I saw that in a movie, but what do you really do the rest of the time? So folks aren't sure what it is we're doing, and we can't just assume they're going to come to us, right? Because they're not quite sure what we're offering. So I share all of this with you because I really have a deep heart, especially for small churches who think the problem is with them, right? Like, what's wrong with us that we've gotten so much smaller, the budget is smaller, people aren't coming to us, so there's not anybody here under 30, or what's wrong with us, or why aren't we attracting a pastor? It used to be we just, asked for 15 resumes and set up some interviews. It's not you. In the little churches I was serving in Montana, the way I like to put it, the problem is not that you are losing the beauty contest. It's a different scene. It's a change right now that's underway. And so do not frame this as a self-esteem crisis, because that just sort of is very diminishing and wounding. And then we're not able to bear the gospel very winsomely, are we, if we're sort of preoccupied with what's wrong with me? No. We're fine. We're following Jesus, who is risen and who is calling us into a troubled world. And so we need to not have a self-esteem crisis and make it about us when it's really about the whole world changing right now. And one of the ways I like to contrast this is a lot of what we're struggling with is we're confusing form and substance. And so when I say form, like, here's a common form of church. We have 80 people on the rolls, and we have a full-time pastor, and a half-time secretary, and a half-time music person, and a very part-time custodial person, and we roll around with every year a 1/3 class of board members, right? Like, that's a way of doing church. That is not the church. That is, when my husband and I were ministering in Namibia, Southwest Africa, that is not what churches look like at all. And for a while, we were in a little house church that had no budget and no building. It was about 6 families, and we gathered together and shared meals and opened the scriptures. There are so many ways that church can exist and carry on. And we need to not get scared if the model isn't going to be just like it was 20 years ago. Again, this goes to the church is thriving in all kinds of forms right now. And so we need to not confuse a particular form of church with the substance of being Jesus' people who've been called to gather, worship, receive the bread, go out, be there with our neighbors who are being bullied or losing their jobs or whatever, and be salt and light in the world. That call is more relevant than ever. So, the church, like, let's not get so anxious about ourselves that we stop looking out the window to realize how desperately each one of you is needed right now in God's world. Let me back this up. Right now, we all know, we've seen the Surgeon General announce that there is a public health crisis related to loneliness. It's so fascinating how it affects our blood sugar levels and our blood pressure and our longevity, how many years. Like recent stat I heard was like 6 more years it adds or takes away from our life depending on how isolated we feel. Isn't that fascinating how God has created us to be connected to one another? And then it was interesting to read that there's a government official in Great Britain, apparently one in Japan now. They created a minister for loneliness in their government. And you know what these people do? They create opportunities where people can gather and find each other and share their lives and food. And I thought, I know an organization that does something like this, that has an answer to this, that's quite ancient. Here we are. We know how to do this. We don't have to go hire a minister of loneliness. We have Christ, who is a minister of reconciliation and fellowship for us. We're also in a world right now, don't we feel it right now? Wars erupting in our world and strife, political season, and we are longing for hope for some kind of peace and justice and reconciliation in the world. I know someone who has promised to be with us and to hold that kind of faith and vision in the middle of all of this. And you know this person too, and that's part of how we are out in the world as agents of hope in the middle of this. Matthew 25, people hungry, without shelter, incarceration statistics and patterns. Does anybody see this? Does anybody have an answer to this? This is Matthew 25, when Jesus said, "There I am," and there I am in you, showing up in these places. God has responded to these needs, and we are part of that response. And then just the rising level of despair, depression, anxiety, diagnosable. I minister on a college campus as well. We have undergrad, and with 20-year-olds of my own, I watch those stats. And right now, it's creeping up near 50%, 40, 45% for folks having diagnosable anxiety or depression in a given year for that age group. God cares about these children, and by association with God, they're my children and your children too. The church has such an urgent mission in the world right now. We are needed more than ever. So we really can't talk about the decline of the church. This is a moment. This is a moment that God is showing up in the middle of all of this through you and me and our congregations. And so we need to not confuse form and substance. And we need to allow our imaginations to be filled not just with what was that we're missing, and we grieve, and we do need to grieve that and say, it'll never be quite that way again. And those people won't be in the pews. Some of them have gone to be with the Lord, and some of them have gone on to other places. So we need to do that grief work, but then we also need to free up a lot of our imagination to say, what could we do and be now that might be different for the sake of God's world? And so I wanted to give you just a little bit of church history and theology background. Did you know that throughout church history and in many places in the world today, the church wasn't the staff. the church was the sons and daughters, the children of God, gathering regularly and keeping the faith together and caring for their communities. And so we've had other places and moments where that was really cherished and valued as the heartbeat of church ministry. And really, in the 20th century, it shifted in the United States in particular that the church required a full-time hired clergy person with 96 credits of divinity study. I am totally for divinity study. Talk to me if any of you want to take classes. But the problem is when that becomes the delegation that we delegate running the church to someone, or many gifted and busy people not honored, saying this is real ministry too, regardless of what credentials you have. This is the work of Christ through you. And one of my favorite examples is, some of you may know, the explosion of the global missions movements in the 1900s. You know who fueled that? That was like all the ladies' societies, right? Like they got together and they prayed and they wrote the letters and they gathered the funds and they sent the church around the world. That's who fueled that era of missions. So this professionalization, specialization of ministry, I'm glad for the specializations and the training, but not when it starts to eclipse the understanding of the body of Christ, the way we see in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12, the hand, the foot, the ear, the knee, the eye. We can't make it without all of those. And especially when we have this professionalization model and we say, oh, as long as we have an ear, let's say like the clergy person's an ear. Actually, that would be good if we all like listened more than talked. But like just say, yeah, I probably could carry on without one of my ears. And I could carry on actually without both of my ears. We don't want to have models of what in the business or technology world is called single point of failure, right? Like if one person doesn't show up, it all falls apart. It really shouldn't be that way. We should be able to carry on because each part of the body is contributing to the whole and has life in it. Let me zip on here. So we have a movement underway that is the other side of this coin of diminishing professionals to serve churches and smaller churches that I actually think can be more flexible because they're not tied to enormous structures, metaphorically and literally. And I think the Holy Spirit is in this if we will lean into it. And part of some of the, let me see if I'm not on the same slide as you. Yeah, let me back up. I teach, one of the areas I've done research and teaching is the short-term missions movement. Has exploded the past generation. What this tells me is there's a lot, millions and millions of people in the United States who say, I'm not a pro, I'm a ninth grader, or I'm an accountant, but I want to roll up my sleeves and show up and do something meaningful. Wow, this is a very interesting and promising movement of people saying, this work belongs to me too. Or I'm a big fan of Stephen Ministry, which trains lay caregivers. Or tomorrow, I'm going to be at Westminster Church here in town, training 15 people in mental health first aid because they care about their grandkids getting bullied and about their neighbor with depression. And so they said, I can learn a little bit about this, so I feel confident in supporting them. So it's another example of the emergence of a little bit of training for everybody so we can pitch in with joy. And then the seminary where I teach in, of our 250 students, 125 are taking 8-week lay classes. Want to learn about how to visit the hospital or sit in the ICU with confidence? Join us for 8 weeks and talk about what you do with that. Or take a short course in the Old Testament or New Testament, just for your own enrichment, or if you want to lead a Sunday school class and feel like you've got some support in that. So this is really blowing up right now, lay training, and I think it's very exciting as folks run with different pieces in different ways. I'm going to skip through. Oh, yes. I don't know what your tradition is. In the Presbyterian Church, this is very interesting because we tend to like our degrees. Some of the judicatories I'm working with have up to 40% of their churches being led by lay ministers now, who've taken 8 sets of these 8-week classes. And they're finding ways to say, if you have a heart for this, we're going to get you into the pulpit or into the hospital room and make sure you have enough to feel confident. If you want to go on and take up more education, that's great. But right now, it's all hands on deck. And there's a lot of joy and meaning in that. So different in different denominations, but the trend toward equipping the laity and honoring the ministry of the laity is growing across denominations. House churches, yeah. Yes, the illustration of the Church of the Brethren moving back toward the roots of house churches and circles of Bible studies rather than the structures and the professionalization. And I actually think that's a very winsome model for those who are not churched in the world today. Where would you rather show up? Behind those big heavy doors that you're not quite sure what the rituals are? Or would you rather show up for a meal in somebody's living room or on their back deck and talk about struggles of life and how God might have shown up? I think there's something there that we have to offer. So, and as we're talking about this, the 8-week classes that we're offering, and this is common, this is just popping up in a lot of different schools. So we're doing these short courses. Boy, I'm really on the wrong page than you all here. I'm catch up, I'm talking a lot. You can tell I like to talk. But 8 weeks on the Bible, feeling confident and getting a sense of how it all fits together. Or on offering simple devotions before a meeting, which sometimes turn out to be something that you could offer on a Sunday morning in the pulpit rather than saying we're going to cancel church or we don't know what to do because we haven't found the clergy person. And there it is. People who might even be teachers in their day lives or who won the sword drills as children, finding the Bible verses, who are quite capable with confidence sharing a word from the Lord, or testimonies. I so appreciated that this morning. We all have a story to tell. Discipling, how to teach others the faith in Sunday school, caring for others, that's the area I teach in, and we can all learn how to listen deeply and say a simple prayer or show up at a moment where people are distressed and represent God's love. So these are the kinds of micro trainings we're offering anybody in the pews who wants to run with a ball. But some of this requires imagination. Can you start to hear the shift here? When we have all of our vision eclipsed by got to get back to the full-time pastor and the half-time secretary and the music director, and then of course we have to fill the whole choir if we're going to have a music director, and fill in the cribs in the nursery. Like, if we need to grieve and celebrate and say that's part of our wonderful heritage, but then we need to free up our imagination for other models. And once we start to see all these other models, suddenly there's like breathing room. If we only have one choice, and it's that model, and we don't get it, otherwise we're doomed. Talk about anxiety. But if we realize, oh, there's probably 30 ways to be church, suddenly it becomes possibility and curiosity and creativity moving forward. And that makes all the difference in people sensing in us as God's people that there is love and there is hope and there is power in the world. And that's a much more winsome witness as we reach out to our neighbors who are struggling right now. So here's a very profound ancient spiritual quote from Wayne Gretzky. And I am a mother of soccer players, the beautiful game, and I saw this, like, what makes a good soccer player is not that you can run fast or kick hard, it's that you know how to play the field and anticipate things. And Wayne Gretzky put it this way for hockey, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And I think that's a great word for us. Like, what are we doing right now that's preparing for what the world's like 5 years from now and 10 years from now, rather than trying to replicate what we did 20 years ago? So I'm going to give you just some little snapshots. We're going to make this on time. Of what I've seen out the window, metaphorically, as I've been playing around, for different models of church to expand our imagination. I'm going to start with a couple models that are less useful. One is what I call the museum or the yearbook. And that's where we want to invite people in who will admire what we've been in the past. Come hear what our history is. Come hear this great thing that happened 10 years ago. Come hear about this tradition that we started 50 years. Remember the church that does the cantata every Christmas, or that had the booming youth program, or that has the pictures of all the pastors going back 300 years in the hallway. Or we could call it a yearbook too. You know, like when we take out our yearbooks and say, oh, look at those funny hairdos. People who join us right now, they can't participate in any of that. They're just hearing what they missed. The only thing they can join is what's going to happen tomorrow. And so we need to have our celebrations of our traditions and things that even are winding down, but the people who are joining us now are interested in what's going to happen next year and 5 years from now and for the next generation. So we don't want to put too much emphasis on showing off the museum. Even if we maintain our heritage, we want to be looking ahead. Another model that I'm less keen on is what I call falling dominoes, and this is where I've seen regions say, oh, a church is going to close, so let's take those assets and put it into the next church which is trying hard to not close, and they can support a pastor for 4.5 more years, and then if they close, we'll put those assets, that we're just paying it forward into the old model, the next one and the next one and the next one, rather than saying, wait, what are we doing here that has to do with tomorrow that might be outside of the box, rather than trying to keep all our identical dominoes in the old-fashioned stacked up together. And then this model can go either way. And occasionally there are churches that, I don't want to say close. We should never close a church. There's this idea for palliative care, that we support one another in a phase of aging and winding down, and there can be something very beautiful and appropriate and sacred about that. But what I really like is before we're completely wound down, while we still have energy and people, we say, what are we going to birth for the next generation? And I've heard so many creative stories. I heard a story in Minnesota, this church, they found out like their church building used to be this kind of a bakery, and they reopened a bakery, or churches that say, we're not going to exist like we were, but we think there's a need for Christian daycare in our community. And so while we still have time and money and people, we're going to set up something that's going to serve this community in the days ahead. So I really like relaunch or midwifing something better than just wind down. Here's some other glimpses of different models. This is a little community that I worked with in the mountains up in Montana, probably 8 people who were core members. But they ministered to people who came to these health mines in that area from all over the world, people from Russia and Korea and Canada and Amish people. And every Sunday they said, you come over and we're going to pray for you and we're going to feed you. And so the worshiping community was much larger than those 8 people. And part of the reason they were able to carry on with this is because they had a partnership with a large church in Helena, which was older and had assets, and said, we'll help you rehab a little worship space, and we'll come and encourage you and share worship once in a while. So really, they're talking about a partnership, and they said, do you think ever that little church up in the mountains is going to have a sign, a ministry of First Presbyterian? I said, no, I think someday your church is going to have a sign that says, we are a ministry affiliated with that great mission that's happening up in the mountains. They needed each other for energy and for a sense of mission. Related to this, I'm a big fan. I've been in a house church. Sometimes we talk about storefront churches, but the main idea being we're in a different kind of space that is also not creating a great burden upon us for maintaining property. We were actually talking this morning. I was talking about Cincinnati, actually, right? You know, the chapel, for those of you who are in town over in Cincinnati, it's phenomenal. But that community, religious community, has shrunk, and so now they're trying to figure out, what do we do with this beautiful space? And so house churches and small churches sometimes relieve us the burden of having to maintain that and say we are the people of God and we can gather in less expensive, a free space. That little mountain community that I worked with, as the Jackie Saxon of them, when it came around to the time that we had to re-up and confirm insurance for every community, I realized that other than liability, they had nothing to insure. They did not own a building. They did not own a car. I think we had a set of pencils for when we did exercises. It was so freeing. It was so wonderful to not have to worry about maintaining that. Another model, and these are a couple congregations of which I'm aware. The top one is one of my current doctoral students, and they ended up moving into a chapel on a campus and selling their downtown building, which was overwhelming. And they use the assets, and they're running around there like the team now, helping to support a domestic violence shelter and some other projects that they have selected that said, this is us. This is who we want to be in the community if we're not the people in that building on that corner. And then the bottom picture is one of our alums, and they discovered during COVID that it wasn't enough to have some canned goods in a closet. They became the distribution center for those who were hungry. And of course, that need hasn't gone away, even though the pandemic is waning. And they discovered that they were a mission site in their building during COVID, and it's become a new mission and life for them. Another model that's been emerging that I'm a big fan of, as you can hear from our educational programs, is lay-led worship communities. My husband just finished taking the set of 8-week classes, and he's planning on retiring from the school district in the next year or two so that he can serve a church that has funds, and it's the right level for somebody 10 or 15 hours a week to help them be the church together with whoever is there. So lay-led communities are emerging in the Presbyterian church or bivocational ministry. The person in the pirate costume on the top, she's one of those bivocational librarian and pastors, and that's how she fits her life together. And on the bottom is our admissions director, Samuel Felderman at the seminary, and he's there full time. But he also helps 3 small Unitarian, well, not small, the one in town is not small. He helps 3 Unitarian communities keep going. And when he started his rotation once a month in each church, one of the churches down south said, you know, we've been carrying on for quite a while without an installed clergy person. And we're glad you're here, but please don't muck up what we've got going. You know, once a month is probably all right. But just know that we've got things going here. And I love that. I have a friend, her name's Catherine Neely Burton. She ministers among churches in southern Kansas. Many of them do not have installed full-time clergy pastors. And she said, some of them are doing just fine. She's part of a grant that we're administering to strengthen the people across their pews in skill sets where they feel there are gaps. And she said, and I've said too, some of these churches are doing just fine and didn't get the memo that they're supposed to be afraid. They're just continuing on being church. In fact, one of the churches that I really loved serving in Montana had 18 people on the rolls. And they just carried on being church. It's a micro-church model, which I think holds great promise for their communities. One more model I'll mention. I really loved churches in Montana I was working with, Methodist, Lutheran, and Presbyterian. Little string, small town, south of the Canadian border. We're not going to have full-time pastors ever again in each of their 4 churches. So they got together. They're now called the Milk River Parish. They've each kept their worshiping communities, but they're hiring a shared staff, and once a month they worship together. It's kind of the opposite. You know these models where you have mega churches, and then they have to break everybody up into satellite campuses or house churches so that you actually have a smaller group to identify with. This is the reverse, right? Like they started out as the little churches, and they gathered together once a month for things they do in common and for worship and to sing in 4-part harmony with a big choir. But then they get to go home to their traditions the other 3 weeks and keep things going. So this is just a small sampling, but I hope you can hear there are so many ways that the church can be the church, and the world needs us to be the church. Beyond buildings, with flexible budgets, different patterns of staffing, but a key is exercising hope and imagination to think about what might be possible next, even while we miss some things that were behind us. And final shout out, I'm coming out on the dot, Jackie. This is what I grew up in a 3,000 member church. And my first call was in a 1,400 member church. But in between that, I was also ministering in tiny communities in Namibia, and then my time in Montana, and the church I'm a member of or participate in here in Dubuque is a smaller church. And I have fallen in love with the small church. I think it is the hope of our world in crisis right now. And here's why. We can be very personal witnesses in our communities. And this is why I do not take 70 people on a mission trip, right? Like, they just overwhelm the local community, and it's all about their identity, right? They don't disperse into the world. And I think this can be true for church too, right? We don't need to be this big mass of people who are a giant club. Like, we can be out in the community. I loved that 18-member church. When I would walk into it, I didn't have to, like, hello, I'm here, I'll fill out the pew pad, and maybe you'll send me a postcard next week. No, it was just people saying, oh, hi, Beth. And there we were. It was just natural conversation. I had a place to belong. Research shows that there's a much higher percentage of engagement in smaller churches. You might have a 1,600-member church, and you're thrilled that 300 people are really active in leadership. And you have an 18-member church. That church had 18 members who were all doing stuff and engaged and sharing meals together. So there's a higher likelihood of touch points. And so it's really critical we help our, especially smaller congregations, find new ways of carrying on, being salt and light, because I think God has put them where they are in the world for a purpose and for this moment, and for them to be supported and encouraged in that. All right, that was a lot, but thanks for letting me share that. Any brief comments or questions or additions? Yeah. That is very interesting. I don't know what that's about. That could just be that particular slice and moment in time on who's surfaced. For the seminary where I teach, more so than some of our Presbyterian seminaries in other parts of the country, we generally had more men, a little bit more men than women enrolling, but that line met in 2018, and now we probably have more women than men studying. And I just loved, again, in the devotion this morning, can we look and see a pastor in this person or this person, regardless of gender? And this goes back to imagination and memory, right? Some of us just remember that pastor who looked like this. And so if we can open up our vision, or pastors of other nationalities even. Sometimes our churches say, wow, this is new. Do we look at somebody who was born in another country? And this gets back to, who are we expecting? Who are we watching for in the kids who are going to show up? Who are we watching for who might be our next leader, and to expand that vision? Yeah. 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 We are at time. Thanks very much. God bless you. My prayers and excitement are with you for what God can do. Yeah.
So he just,
Yeah.
he just, the thing is, now he's very good to our church and bring people to his church.
Yeah, well, that's kind of complicated, isn't it? Yeah, what do you do with that?
He's been a friend of mine for 11 years.
think we might be us. I'll do a little intro in case we get a straggler or two. They won't miss too much. My name's Beth McCaw. I've been in Dubuque here for 20 years. I cannot believe it. Never lived that long anywhere in my life. It's gone really fast. That's a good sign, right? And I teach at the seminary, the Presbyterian seminary in town. There's also a Lutheran seminary and Emmaus school. We have a lot of good schools here in Dubuque. But I've worn different hats there over the years. I've been a pastor. That's when I had the joy of being a colleague with your executive minister, Reverend Jackie Saxon. Those were great days to travel together. And then I still teach a little bit in the area of practical ministry, and I'm serving as dean right now. And between 2019 and 2022, I was on partial release from the seminary to serve 20 small Presbyterian churches in western Montana. And that just really fueled my vision for the importance of supporting small churches and new ways of life for the future. I love, and I still love, those congregations. And during those years with COVID, I was able to be on a lot of Zoom calls with people across the country talking about the changing landscape of the church. And so part of what I'm bringing to you is that 30,000-foot view of what's going on out there that probably is touching many of your lives. And then also what I'm seeing for some hopeful signs of the church flexing for the future. With that, I'm going to tell you, I have a lot of words on slides that are very small. You don't need to be able to read it. I'm happy to provide them if later on you want to say, okay, I get a copy of that for those interesting numbers or those points or whatever. You can get a copy. All the text is primarily there to keep me online, right? On task, on script. Yeah, it worked last time. It was brilliant. Okay. No, not at all. It worked really well. Okay. So first, the landscape. What's going on in our world? When we think about the church, there was huge growth in the church post-World War II. And part of that was the Spirit moving and people being called to worship God, but also the culture really supported us. Those were days when that was sort of the muscle memory of American society. What do you do on Sunday morning? What you do on Sunday morning is you get up, you get dressed, you dress the kids, and you go to church. So we really benefited from that being a cultural way of life in those days, which is not the case anymore. And that wave of that post-World War II growth is really wrapping up now. So we are not having people who've grown up with that muscle memory or that way of life in their neighborhoods or their communities. Another thing that we're seeing right now is that denominational loyalty or even congregational loyalty is not what it used to be in those days. And the way I put it is that we cannot count on our children taking our places in our pews or our grandchildren. And that's kind of what used to happen. Like maybe they even stayed in the same town and literally went to the same church. But if they didn't, then maybe they would go to a Baptist church somewhere else. Or maybe my kids will seek out a Presbyterian church in the places where they move. Nope, they didn't. I'm grateful they found churches. I'm glad they're experiencing the love of God and they're worshiping God. But it was not a priority to them to find a Presbyterian church USA to join. And so that model for perpetuating ourselves isn't there anymore. I was really interested to hear the camp report this morning about it used to be 85% were Baptists who attended our camp, and now I can't remember if it was 40 or 60, but roughly half were not members of Baptist congregations at camp. And on one hand, we can feel a little sad about that. It's like, where did all the Baptist kids go? On the other hand, we could be thrilled about that and say, here we are reaching kids who otherwise might not have a witness to the love of God, and we get the privilege of spending this week or 2 weeks with them and demonstrating to them where they might not hear it anywhere else. And this gets to the question of, and we'll talk more about this, and this was mentioned in our devotions this morning, imagination. And when we think about imagination and what we're envisioning, who are we expecting? Who are we looking for to fill our pews? And maybe we have limited imagination because we're using a lot of our imagination to remember what was rather than to think what might happen that is different from what was, and we miss seeing it. It was also lifted up in the devotions this morning, and I thought there's a crisis of imagination when nobody in the 1970s can look at a little girl in Texas and see a future preacher or teacher, right? Because that's not who you're looking for in the preacher, that's not who you're looking for in the teacher. And so they've almost missed, thank you, God. Who are we expecting to show up in our congregations, or that we're going to show up with out there in the world? Another demographic shift, congregations have rapidly gotten smaller on average in the United States. And so 2000, and this is across traditions, the median membership was 137. Fast forward only 20 years. That just doesn't seem very long now. I've lived long enough. 20 years doesn't seem very long in the great scheme of things. 65. 137 down to 65 for average size. So this is a phenomenon that's happening. While all this is going on, we have a wave of traditional full-time clergy who are retiring. So in that time when I was serving the churches in western Montana, where they might have had one or two people retiring in a given year, suddenly there's about a third of the churches that were anticipating or in the midst of retirements. And that's also part of that wave through the baby boomers and right after. And so suddenly we're really missing them for church leadership in congregations that are looking to call a pastor. It's a much smaller pool out there. And here's a statistic from my tradition, the Presbyterian Church USA. Last year, our Board of Pensions, which ensures a lot of our pastors, did a comprehensive survey. Or actually, they have all the data. And of 150 member churches or less, which is the vast majority of our churches, 30% had an installed clergy pastor, which means 70% of our majority of our churches, the smaller or medium smaller churches, did not have installed clergy person, and many of those will not have that model again of a minister of word and sacrament, contracted, installed for full-time ministry in the traditional model. And that's not just Presbyterian. I'm directing a grant at Dubuque Seminary here, which is for revitalizing small churches who are saying we're not going to lean back toward that model anymore. We're going to find a different way to be church, given that the landscape has changed. And then, along with all of this, those who are showing up in seminary where I teach have less traditional visions. It's not like even just 20 years ago where May rolled around and 40 U-Hauls were lined up at seminaries and graduation happened and everybody got into the U-Hauls and drove off to start a traditional church pastorate. People are still going to seminary, but they're going with lots of different things. Like maybe I'll be bivocational and be a social worker who also has leadership roles in the church. Or maybe this is a bivocational combination I've seen some of our alums do, which I really love, librarian and pastor. Actually, I think there's some interesting touch points there. Libraries is our place of learning and nurture and shelter and access to services, and I think that's actually quite a profound community ministry, to tell you the truth. But our seminary students are looking way outside the box. And so sometimes when our listings are just the traditional thing we knew 20 years ago, we're not going to have a higher percentage of them tagging that. So we take all of this, with all this change, and a word that we use a lot is decline. I don't like using the word decline. I think it's really more a shift in how we do things. And we had some great examples in the last session of churches which are going back to old models of house churches and smaller Bible study kinds of settings. And I also have a large enough view of people I track with in different places in the world that the church is alive and well and growing in new ways, and Christ is still risen. And so I don't like using the word decline as if the church, as if Jesus' church in the world is winding down now. It's really not true, but sometimes it feels that way with the demographic shifts that we're experiencing, and that we're disoriented, that it's not like it used to be, and we don't know quite what it's going to be, and so it's easy to imagine that it's over. In the middle of these shifts, new forms of church and leadership are growing. So in the Presbyterian Church USA, some of our greatest growth numerically is in what we call our 1001 new worshiping communities, which are attracting people who are not churched, right? So it's a new population they're reaching out to, and they're doing church in different ways, but that is a point of growth. And there's new types of ways we're leading traditional congregations we'll end with today. In the middle of all of this, COVID, right? This was all starting to shift. And then we got to 2019 and 2020, and it just put the gas pedal on the shifts. And in many places, we're still waiting. We're still waiting to get back to 2018 and for folks to return to be in the pews and have that muscle memory on Sunday mornings. And we're starting to worry now because it's not happening. That's not about the church. That's about society. You know what else is not going back? The number of people who are homeschooling or doing other kinds of arrangements for their schooling. There are the people who are never going to go back to the office 5 days a week, but are going to go 3.5 days and then do hybrid remote work arrangements. Theaters, the big campaigns right now. Everybody please come back and watch movies in the theater, right? It's not just about us. It's societal shifts and how we gather and how we hang on to one another. And along with all of this, we have the rise of the nuns. That's not the nuns wearing the habit, taking religious vows, but the N-O-N-E-S. And this is when you go to the hospital and you check in and they say, what is your religious affiliation, in case there's a chaplain in the house or you want us to call somebody. And I say Presbyterian or Baptist, and then some people say none. And that used to, in 1985, 7% of Americans said that. 2020, it was 29%, and someone in our last session said they thought it was 40% now heading into 2025.
If I could interject,
Yeah, go ahead.
18 years as a healthcare chaplain.
Okay.
And yes, that is very true. I would say this was in a Catholic hospital. I would say more than half.
Okay, so none.
Identify as not having a church connection, though they might identify as a Catholic or with some Protestant organization. They did not attend
All right, so thank you for that. So over 50%, and maybe folks will have a very loose affiliation. Oh yeah, I was baptized, or my mom was Catholic, or whatever, and it's so, or like at Christmas, this would be by choice for Christmas
The
Eve.
one thing was the 2 o'clock in the morning, you're the on-call chaplain, you call the ER, there's someone who identifies as Catholic who's actively dying in the ER, but you find out from family that they have no parish,
Yeah,
but they want last rites. And so now you're trying to figure out in the middle of the night how you're going to get the priest to
yes,
come in and do last rites for somebody that has zero connection
yeah.
to their
I remember when I was ministering in a parish setting and then having a relationship with a local funeral director who would say, someone's just died, they have no connections, can you be on call to the community? So can you hear how dramatic the shifts have been? We go back to like just post-World War II and everybody's going to church, and now folks are not all going to church and they're not even sure what it is. That doesn't mean that people are less spiritual or less curious, or that they have fewer big questions about life, or that they don't have a deep desire to know that they're beloved, say by the God of the universe. It's just a shift in what people are familiar with. And along with this, people then are, with not having any points of contact, what is a church? What goes on in a church? You know, I walk my dog on Sunday morning past these big, heavy wooden doors. What's going on? They're doing some rituals and sort of like a club, and I don't know about that. Or I even find if I'm on a train or a plane and it comes up and I say I'm a pastor, like what do you do all day? You know, like it's a sweet job. They pay you to talk for 15 minutes on Sunday. Then you just kind of kick around. Right, but folks don't, sometimes I think it's kind of on me if they don't understand what I do, because I need to demonstrate to them what I do and how I'm showing up with the love of God in the world. I'm not talking about office hours. I'm talking about people really wondering what the church does. They're like, what differences, what kind of community is this? How does that relate to me? So I share all that demographic stuff, which you probably know, because one of the concerns I have is I don't want churches, especially small churches experiencing these big shifts, to have heightened anxiety thinking that it's about them, it's about you, if you're in a congregation like that. We can't afford to frame this as a self-esteem crisis, because it's not. This is a sea change. And also, if we make it a self-esteem crisis, it just robs us of all of our energy and our joy and our vocation. These are trends. This is not about losing the beauty contest and trying to attract a pastor. The traditional ones aren't out there anymore, and so we're starting to try new things, because the church is alive and well in the world and functioning with many different models. And we'll explore those as we end today, because we want to use our imagination not just to remember what was and try to replicate that, but we need to imagine the 100 other things that could be once we do our grief work and missing how we used to do church. And the way I like to put this is sometimes we confuse form and substance. Here is a form of church. A form of church as a community of 60 people who have a full-time pastor and a part-time secretary and a less part-time music director and a part-time custodian who keep the church running. So that is a model of church, but it is only a model of church. So in my lifetime, I've been part of 5 sort of mission outpost congregations that were fledgling in the time when we were living in northern Namibia. I've been part of a house church that had no buildings, like 6 families getting together and opening scripture every Sunday night. It was like, that's radical. Not 11 a.m. on Sunday, but just getting outside the box. I supported a worshiping community when I was in Montana that met in a warehouse because they were primarily ministering to the at-risk youth in town who were skateboarders. And they found them skating, and some of them couldn't go home at night in this city skate park. And they said, oh, you need a case of water and pizza and a lot of love. And so they started doing it at the skate park, and then they ended up renting a warehouse and getting some grant money to start opening up that space for them week round. And then on Thursday nights they would have worship, and then there were a lot of adults attracted to this to support it, and it became a worshiping community. Didn't involve Sundays, it didn't involve a proper sanctuary. The people on the rolls were not even technically on the rolls, but I think it made God very happy. That is church. Once we can distinguish there are different forms of church from the church, the gathered followers of Christ who come together, hear the word, break the bread, and are sent back out into the world, suddenly we are freed to many different possibilities. And it's really critical. I'm very passionate about this at the seminary and in being able to share with communities like yours. It's really critical that we expand our imagination and reaffirm our sense of call, because right now the world's on fire. The world needs Christ's church in the world responding to what's going on. And so we can't just afford to keep rehashing our statistics. We need to track what's going on and steward our resources. But the real stuff of our existence has to do with loving God and loving our neighbor. And we need to protect a lot of our bandwidth to do that well. So just some ways that our world is in need right now. Public health crisis of loneliness. Some of you know, Surgeon General has declared it a public health crisis, that people are literally getting sick and dying for sake of being lonely. It's fascinating to me how we are created to be in relationship, and when we don't have those, apparently it can shave 6 years off of our life expectancy and elevate our blood sugar levels and elevate our blood pressure. So we are created to be in a community. And it fascinates me that apparently there's a government office now, officer in an office, I assume, in Great Britain and also in Japan for ministers of loneliness, or whatever they've titled it. And what do these people do? They are paid taxpayer money in order to find ways to help people connect and share meals and share their lives together in hope and support. And I thought, I know an organization that knows how to do this, an ancient organization that is able to offer those things. So the church there. right now, don't we really feel it right now? Wars erupting in our world, fractures in the midst of a political season among families and nations. People are weary and longing and afraid. Were there just a sign of hope that reconciliation and justice and peace were possible? I know there actually is a reason to hang on to that hope and keep the faith, and you know it too. And right now we need to be felt agents of hope out in the world when people are being buffeted by these winds. We are needed. We track the numbers on those who are hungry and those who are without shelter, and the dynamics of our system of incarceration, and what leads to that and what results from that. And I can think in the U.S., and I'm also thinking globally. We have an alum who I'm tracking in Sudan right now, which is just heartbreaking. Matthew 25. We happen to be a people who are led by someone who says, there I am in those, and there I am in you showing up in the world. God isn't away, not observing, not caring. God actually has shown up, and it's you, and it's me, and it's each of us. And so we are a sign that God is responding to these needs. And then along with all of this, uncertainty whether there's a God who is there to help us today. And I track the brain health rates among 20-somethings with interest. In part, I'm on a college campus as well as a seminary, and then I've got 3 kids who are in their 20-somethings. And the rates are really high right now for diagnosable depression and anxiety, and not just among that population. Across the country, we're seeing spikes in those and risks for suicide. Can you hear that God's beloved people, God's beloved world is really in need right now for a demonstration of care and a word of hope? And so we can't afford to just get stuck on anxiety on whether or not we can get back to our 1990 form of church. We need to find ways to be God's people right now because we're placed in the world with a gospel message that Christ is still risen, and this gospel holds a lot of life for me in good days and bad days, and I steward that for others who are waiting to hear it. So there's all the reason in the world for us to figure out new ways to be church with deep meaning and deep assurance from God. And I think part of the struggle for us at this moment, this disorienting moment when everything's shifting, is like, give me some boning because I have motion sickness right now. I don't know where we're going, and I just am so disoriented because it's not like it used to be. But if we could resist confusing particular forms of church, of which there are many, with the assurance that through the ages we are and we will be God's gathered people around the table where Jesus has said, my body, my blood for you, the word of life, that endures. The church's identity is quite solid and quite needed right now. So I want to share with you a little bit of history and an ecclesiology, a theology of what it means to be the church, because it's not about, and I remember when we were ministering in Namibia, Africa, and sometimes there would be this confusion from visiting groups on to build a church was literally to build a building, or to put a steel roof on a structure or pour concrete or whatever. And so then we start to send confusing messages on what the church is, and then we also start to send confusing messages on what it is to be a minister of the gospel, as if that only belonged to professional people. So in many places in the world today, in many places even in the United States today, and throughout history, the heartbeat of the church has not been having a full-time paid installed clergy person. It has been the people in the pews, the body of Christ that we see in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12. You know, that passage, you know, the eye and the ear and the hand and the foot and the elbow, and we need all of the pieces. And then something wonderful happens when we each run with our piece. One of the examples I love to lift up on this is we think about the missions movements of the 1900s. You know, those were the different gospel societies and whatnot, and people just went all over the world. And you know how that was largely fueled. Anybody have any recollection on this? a lot of that was fueled by the ladies' societies, right? They wrote the letters and they tagged folks and they inspired, you know, the 10-year-old in the pew to say, maybe I'll leave my neighborhood someday and go do something if that is something for me to do. They experienced a call, if you will, and collected the pennies, and that was largely a result of what was happening in the pews, if you will. Well, it happened because people got out of the pews. They worshiped in the pews, and then they went to their business, their ministry, after worship on Sundays. And I've been part of and ministered in communities where it was very much understood that being church is something that is about the whole body, which is, I think, the title for today, just every member ministry. Not that we work everybody to death, but that every person has their gift to bring. Maybe one person is the natural gift of comfort, and they could learn to feel confident saying a prayer in a hospital as well as delivering a casserole. Or maybe somebody's a teacher in their day life and with a little bit of training would also have joy teaching a Sunday school class on the Gospels. But this idea that a ministry requires professionalization, that you have to have somebody show up with 72 credits of a Master's of Divinity and be ordained only by this body, and that's all important. I work in a seminary, and I've taken a lot of classes and benefited from every single one because I'm very thirsty to learn more and grow more. But degrees need to not be at the diminishment of all of the gifts in the pews, that the whole body of Christ is ministering together. And so at the seminary, of the 250 students we have right now, 125 of them are in our certificate classes, and those are brief 8-week classes. And I teach the one on caregiving. What does it mean to really deeply listen to somebody and feel confident just saying a prayer for them or offering a word of hope? Or how do you navigate going to the hospital? Or what do you do if you're feeling like you're getting out of your depth and somebody might need professional support? So 8 weeks, we cover that so people can feel confident for their grandkids who are being bullied or their neighbor who seems depressed. They don't have to only have the number of the one pastor in town to handle it, that the body starts to feel confident in ways that they share life together. There is a movement underway. I think this is the flip side of the shortage of traditional clergy out in the pool right now. I think the flip side of it is discovering ways that we can carry on being church and have some breathing room without feeling panicked that we've got to hire the right credentials. Again, not to diminish that, but to supplement that we need to not have what's called in engineering, in other fields, single point of failure, right? If the whole organization is dependent on one person, and that one person is not there, the whole thing needs to not crumble. When I go back to my body illustration, I could get away without both of my ears, let alone without one of them, all right? So we need to not have churches that say, wow, we can't exist with this form of an ear. Actually, we've got feet and eyes and ears and hands, and we're able to carry on being church in flexible ways. Some examples I have of how I think there's this little wave of honoring the ministry of the laity. One is I've done research and I teach in the area of short-term missions. That, the same time while clergy has been declining, what has been escalating is short-term mission work. And I am thrilled by that if we do it well, because what it tells me, there are people saying, I'm an 8th grader or I'm an accountant, but I can roll up my sleeves and show up alongside someone and be of encouragement and be a witness to what God is doing in the community. So I think that the short-term mission movement really can be redeemed if it's done well, to engage people in sharing a life of faith and exercises of hope together. Another one I'm really keen on, I'm a big fan of Stephen Ministries. Some of you might have heard it, trains lay people to just care for one another, get together for coffee while you're going through grief or whatever your crisis is. Or tomorrow, I'm going to be at Westminster Church here in town, training about 15 people in mental health first aid. And it's an 8-hour course where they learn first steps if somebody seems to be in distress or seems to be at risk. And I love that people in church say, I want to know what to do when my antenna are going off and I'm talking to someone, I think they're struggling, I don't want to have to be scared and run away. I want to know what to do next for them. That's very faithful to being the church in the world. Or again, the 125, the 50% of our students right now who are taking brief courses so they can run with a ball. One that doesn't overwhelm them, but that is their strength, is their gift, is their joy, and to feel confident, and they have a few more tools in their toolkit to do that. And one of the reasons this is helpful to be strengthening everybody in their gift is then, even if and when there might be a paid pastor role person in the church, they're not completely burned out by it being expected that this half-time pastor is going to be the old full-time pastor, music director, secretary, and sacristan. They can be joining a community that's strong and that's very attractive to folks. A slide will end with of our admissions director at the seminary, and that's his full-time day job, but he's also a part-time Unitarian pastor for 3 different congregations. And when he started doing a rotation once a month to each congregation, there's one down south that they said, well, it's nice you're here, but we've been going for a long time without a pastor on staff, and we kind of have our routine, the different things we each do. And so it's all right if you're here once a month, but just please don't muck up what we've got going on here. And I thought that was so healthy. You know, now they benefit from him being a part of the mix and bringing some extra tools and insight. But they weren't languishing, waiting for him to show up. They were carrying on with their business and gathering and sharing worship and reaching out in their community. And the rates right now of burnout of people who do go in traditional church ministry are astronomical because of the lack of supports in a tumultuous world. And we need to not burn out folks who do have the gift of some time and training devoted to supporting the church. It was kind of funny. We have Jackie here, but when, I don't know what the polity is for the Baptists, but in the Presbyterians, a regional body does not have to have what we call an executive presbyter. There's other things. You've got to have a clerk. You've got to have 9 churches as members. But you do not have to have an executive presbyter. And when I was hired, somebody said to me, I'm looking forward to supporting your important work here. And I said, on the contrary, I'm here to support you in your important work. You're hiring staff, and if it would have served you better to hire a massage therapist, you could have done that. But you chose to hire me, so I will try to do my best to support you in your work. Can you hear the shift when a pastor arrives part-time or lay or clergy to say, oh, I'm joining a community of faith, exercising their faith? That's hopeful and joyful and life-giving, even when there is staffing. So all this to say, right now, the fields are ripe for harvest, and so we are praying for laborers, but there's not just people stepping out of seminary graduation ceremonies. It's also every disciple who would find joy in life if they were supported and what their piece is in the life of a community. And we need to be supporting those gifts, and that's why our seminary is putting so much energy into these micro courses for folks who would just like to feel more confident in what they're doing. And it's actually a grant that I'm directing from Lily with our seminary right now for 6 judicatories and working with 6 congregations in each on the only requirement for them is that they don't want to put all of their energy and all of the eggs in the basket in looking for the 40-hour-a-week person to come from the horizon. Maybe they end up having full-time, part-time pastor along the way, and that happens along the side, but they're throwing their energy into saying, what are some other models that we could exercise to be church so we're not hanging everything on that one hook or that one person if we have a staff member. So in the grant that I'm directing, here, let me catch up with you on the slides here. Again, these are available if you want them later. But we're providing these 8-week courses in Bible, preaching. Sometimes people don't want to preach, they don't want to step into a pulpit, but they'd be glad to know how to form a devotion to start a committee meeting when it's their turn. And then sometimes it turns out those devotions would make quite a nice message on Sunday. When folks are saying, what are we going to do next Sunday? We didn't find somebody. Teaching the faith, I teach caring like I described. Like we can learn to have some deepened listening skills and problem-solving skills with folks. That's so empowering to feel like I know what to offer when I come alongside somebody who's troubled. So these are some of the things we're doing micro-training in, and in other traditions this is happening too. hope you can hear the shift. That what is critical for us to lean into the future is to not use our entire imagination trying to get back to what it looked like in 1999 in our congregations. Because once we're able to entertain other possibilities, it's like popping open 30 new windows. And suddenly we're not scared because we're not painted into a corner. It could be this or that, or probably not this, but maybe a little bit of this. Suddenly it becomes creative and curious, and we might even try some things, and some will gain traction and some won't. But we're able to try some things with hope and curiosity and use our imaginations toward the future. So with that in mind, I'm going to do this last section, and then we'll have a little bit of time for comments, thoughts, and ideas from you all. I'm going to start out with the great ancient theologian Wayne Gretzky, who said, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And I'm a parent of a couple of soccer players, and I think part of the reason it's called the beautiful game is because it's not just how hard you can kick the ball as an individual or how fast you can run as an individual. It's how you can watch the field and anticipate where your teammate's going to be and where the ball's going to land and where the energy is going. And I think this is a great quote for the church today, right now. It's not just about sitting on our own, worrying, trying one person try harder. No, it's what's going on the landscape in our world right now. What's going on in the landscape of the church? And how do we need to be preparing for what that might be like in 5 years or 10 years? Maybe we'll be leading worship in a warehouse for skateboarders. I don't know. But we need to have our eyes open for what is bubbling up, or to look at the 8-year-old girl in the pew in Texas and say, oh, I can see a church leader there. I wonder if she needs a tap and an encouragement, that could be part of what she does. So using our imagination. So with that, I'm going to give you some snapshots of some of the windows I've been able to look out of metaphorical plane flying over the countryside, and what I see that's hopeful to me or what is worrisome to me when we think about models of church. One model we need to be aware of is what I call the museum, or another way to put it is the yearbook. And this is where we have a rich sense of heritage, which is wonderful. And we maintain it and we polish it, and it could be a lot of different things. You know, we're the church that has the storied bell tower. We are the church who had the right reverends so-and-so for 30 years. We're the church that does the Christmas cantata every year. We're the church that had the great youth program in the day in the town. And rehearsing that to the point that that's we understand that as our peak and our best possible self, instead of understanding it as a moment, a form in time along the way, along the journey. And or another way to put it is the yearbook. You know, when we pull out those high school or college yearbooks and we say, look at that, and I remember that, and that was great time, and I wonder where those people are now, and I kind of miss them a little bit, and what funny hairdos we had. The problem with putting a lot of our energy into maintaining the museum and rehearsing the yearbook is that anybody who joins us now cannot participate in that. We're just telling them everything they missed. And we want them to admire it and think that was great. And a little bit of that is nice, should they do that. But you know, if you should, when you move to a new town, right, you don't want to hear about the Founders Club, right? Because you can never be part of the Founders Club. You can only be part of what that community is going to do next year and 5 years from now. And so we need to be cautious about putting a lot of energy into the museum. And sometimes it's literally maintaining the museum. I've talked with some churches and they say, yeah, we got 4 sets of hymnals because they were all dedicated every time we bought the new one. And we don't want to get rid of the green ones or the red ones or the blue ones. So now we've got literally stacks of dusty hymnals. And that's actually an interesting metaphor to think about. Like, what are we dusting off, or not even dusting off, but hanging on to, that's taking up bandwidth for us because we're trying to get back to it. Another model that worries me is what I've called falling dominoes. And that's where we say, in my tradition for judicatories, regional bodies, to say, oh, we have a church closing, and so we're going to take those funds and we're going to put them into the next church at risk so they can, you know, squeeze out 4.5 more years of doing their traditional model on their budget. And then if that closes, we can, you can hear There is a model for consolidating and sharing ministry, and I'll have a nice example of that. But if the point is just to keep desperately funding, trying to do what we did in 1990, it's worth questioning, saying, what are we doing? Why are we doing that? Is it nostalgia? Is it assumption that there's only one model of church and how we're stewarding our resources right now? So the falling dominoes is one that concerns me. Another one that can go either way is sometimes there are congregations that sort of reach the end of their God-given purpose in that community. I remember when we were actually in Namibia, and there was a community we started out in, and we lived there, and we had a traditional little structure we were living in, and made out of reeds and straw roof. And then a couple of years later, the whole village moved. They moved closer to the river. It was a good thing. But I could not believe 6 months later we went back and you couldn't even see a sign. Like it was all gone. It changed. But it was because everybody went and they did something else somewhere else. And so sometimes there are congregations that are going to wrap up a way of life like they've had. But what I think is very exciting is rather than just saying, oh, we'll spend down our budget and then we'll make a plan to sell the building, while there's still people and resources, energy, say, what do we want to be midwives to? That it's consistent with our mission. And I was talking with one church, had this amazing story. I think it was up in Minnesota. Like they discovered their church and former bakery or something, so they like revived and were doing this bakery ministry. I've talked to churches have started Christian daycare in their facilities. They said this big empty building, and this is what our community needs right now. And can we birth something out of our resources and our energy while we're still here that might be different? Another really common example is when we start to house immigrant congregations and have nesting congregations or ecumenical arrangements. We had a speaker at the seminary last spring who said that nationally in certain denominations, our problem is not we're poor. We actually have a lot of assets that we're struggling to maintain, and some of that is in buildings and property. And what does it mean to say, let's actually use these in a way that is missional for the Jesus of Matthew 25? So that can go either way. You can hear that if a church is wrapping up a traditional way of life. Here's some other models that are very different. This could be called a chapel model or a satellite model. That picture is a community that's up in the mountains in Montana that I ministered with. Maybe 8 people there regularly. They were what's called a new worshiping community. They did not have the people to charter. And part of the reason they were able to carry on is they had some support in getting started and celebrated and encouraging from an older, wealthier, established church 40 miles away, First Church so-and-so. And so they had this very lively ministry among people who had come to that little mountain town for this like health spa for people who have arthritis and things like that. A lot of people came from Russia and Korea and Canada and Amish people. It's interesting. I can tell you about that otherwise. But the point is, here's this little group of 8 people, and there are sick people from all over the world showing up for several weeks at a time in their community. And so that picture, their church is gathering on Sunday and finding people who are sick, staying in the campgrounds and saying, come, we'll pray for you, and we'll feed you, and we are there for you. And I think just that makes God very, very happy. And at one point, the pastor at the big church, the old church, said, oh, do you think someday there'll be a sign out in front of there that this is a ministry of First Presbyterian? I said, no, I think someday there's going to be a sign out in front of your church saying this is a ministry reflective of the phenomenal mission that's going on out in the world with this community, that they needed each other for that sense of life. And so supporting small communities as places of mission and of service, I think, is very exciting. House church. And I mentioned I've been part of a house church. That little community that was up in the mountains I mentioned, thing with Jackie Saxon here, every year would come around, I'd have to verify that all of our churches had insurance. And that year I realized, yeah, there's liability and that's it, because they don't own a building, they don't own a car. We have some pencils and some paper, and somebody donated a little pulpit to use in the living room. So house churches or storefronts are not heavily invested in their property And sometimes that's deliberate because then they're freed up to be missional and to be God's people. And I have a nephew, and he's a young person. He's 26, I think. And he and his wife really cherish being part of a very small worshiping community, as in less than 20 people, because they loved being part of a faith family. And I think this is a promising model for our world right now, where people are alone and isolated. I think there's something to house church and inviting people to a place that feels like home and is a small enough circle to really hang on to each other. A couple other models. The top picture is an alum of ours, and they had a very large church building on a prominent corner. It was a very expensive building. They weren't using all of it, and made the hard decision to sell it to be used otherwise, and they moved into a chapel on a campus. And then they use their proceeds that now they're sort of a mobile mission team, and there's certain areas like the domestic violence shelter that they're a presence, right? Like their presence in the community is no longer the beautiful building on the corner. Their presence is the community, as we call those people when we are having a spike in cases of domestic violence, because they know what to do. And the bottom picture is an alum of ours whose church discovered during COVID that their community needed more than a closet with some canned goods, that they needed serious food distribution. Remember the news stories and the cars lined up and people who had never accessed that before, and they discovered they really needed to run a store in their empty space. And so they started that, and they continued that, and that actually, they discovered a mission in the middle of that. So they didn't sell their building. They started running a mission through their building in a fresh way that they had never done before. I've mentioned my affinity for increasing lay leadership in worshiping communities. Person dressed as a pirate in the top is one of those bivocational people, pastor and librarian. So it was like Children's Literature Day or something like that at the library. But also bringing some nice synergy to her part-time pastorate. And down at the bottom is a picture of the admissions director I had mentioned, who's working for us by day, and then also supporting those 3 worshiping communities. And I'll give you just one more model because we're getting near time here. Several of the small churches that I was serving, and it's called the High Line of Montana, just below the Canadian border where the train goes across. So 3 towns there, and as their longtime or full-time pastors retired or left, they realized they were never going to have this model again for every single one of their churches. And so they've pulled together what they call the Milk River Parish. And nobody gave up their tradition, Lutheran, Methodist, and Presbyterian. They each still have their houses of worship. But this is a part-time lay Presbyterian pastor who's part of their team. She has a day job in a school and kids, so she's got plenty to keep her busy. But she also is really gifted in occasional preaching and Christian ed. So she pitches in for the parish churches, helping them with that. And they've hired a lead pastor to put together their ecumenical team that they share their staff, which creates breathing room for them to be themselves. And so they worship together once a month, and they enjoy that. Then they go to their home communities and have that the other 3 days of the week. Or 3 days of the month. It's sort of like that reverse of what you hear mega churches. You know, you've got 3,000 member church. We've got to break up everybody into deacon groups of 30 people who have a picnic once a year. Well, this is the reverse. It's small churches who says we'll help each other, be each other well. And so they've come up with that model, and it's really beautiful. And I can tell you one other thing about that community that was inspiring to me. I remember when they were posting their position to find a lead pastor to pull together this team among the churches, and when they were posting their position, they said, you know, Presbyterians were so big on data and demographic information. Our demographic information doesn't show many children between 1st and 3rd grade. I said, I'm sorry, that's sad. We're all missing that. But then, another meeting later by Zoom, I said, what is this in your posting? That's the Fishes and Loaves Club. They said, oh yeah, this is this club we have on Tuesday afternoons. There's like 35 kids in the neighborhood, and we do these things. And I thought, there's your kids. There's your kids. They're not in the Sunday school room on the rolls with the gold stars for attendance on Sunday morning. They're on Tuesday afternoon, and they're in your community And those are the kids that God has brought to you. So it's the imagination issue. Last slide. I really feel, especially for our smaller churches, that it's critical we help and support them in finding new ways of being church, because I think they bring some real advantages in this era. I think I don't like taking, when I do mission team stuff, I don't like taking 50 people somewhere, because then it's just like a big club that overwhelms a community and you're kind of about yourself and your experience. I like taking a dozen people who disperse and are with folks in their homes and wherever they want to welcome us to be witnesses. So I think small churches are really positioned well to be at the high school basketball game and to know the kids in the elementary school and to know which neighbor, hasn't been seen coming out of her house for 4 days. I think there's real advantages to being embedded in the community in that way. One of the churches I really loved in Montana, 18 people on the rolls. When I walked in, it wasn't like worry about taking somebody's place and I'll fill out the pew pad and somebody will send me a postcard in 4 days. No, it was, hi, child of God, Beth, come here. And then we're just talking about life. It's very easy to join 18 people who are loving. The research shows that you have a much higher percentage of engagement in smaller churches. So my first congregational call was in church, like 1,400 members. Yay, we've got 300, 400 people who are rolling up their sleeves doing things. I go to that 18-member church. You know what percentage are active? 18 people are active. They each have their part in the life of the church together. There are no spectators there. Everybody has a valued, cherished places. So I think there's something very special that the small churches embedded in communities have to offer right now, and it's worthy of us finding new ways to carry on being church. So there you go. Lots of information. I know we're going to lunch, but maybe a comment or question or additional insights. Yeah.
About the Wayne Gretzky comment.
Yeah.
I think for me, if you're a pastor or a church leader and you don't have who moved my cheese,
Yeah, there you go.
my cheese on your shelf,
Yeah.
and aren't reading it regularly, you need to start doing that, because I think it's excellent what you're talking about.
Yeah, so a recommendation for who moved my cheese. Yeah.
But also, when I first went into ministry late 1990s and 2000, I went to some pastor conventions in California, sponsored by Zondervan Publishing. And the big thing back then was the emerging church movement.
Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of talking about here? Because, again, it's different language now, but it was the same type of thing where churches were just popping up in some of these larger communities with a mission or something attached to them, and they serve their purpose and then they
Yeah, the emerging church movement is still there. Like maybe this is a Venn diagram. There's like some overlap of what was happening there. I'm really cautious about not trying to endorse a methodology, right? Because then we desperately try to buy that book and try to replicate exactly how it happened in this community or that. You remember like Rick Warren, like that? Yeah. We learn from each other. We get little ideas and inspirations, and then we listen to the Spirit in our home communities and see what fits. So. All right, friends, I think there's lunch waiting. Thank you for the time with you. God go with you and give you hope. Yeah.